Hello, good morning, everybody. Um, okay, so we finally finished Freemasonry and Kabbalah, and now we're moving on to Freemasonry and Judeo-Freemasonry and Mormonism. So, as usual, at the beginning of my streams, I'm on partial shadow ban, and it's hard to find my videos, or can be hard, especially the first three. So you can find them at vincentbrunoshadowban.blogspot.com. It's at the big bottom of the screen, and it's in the description box. You can find them there. Now, if you just give me a second, um, ooh, give me a second. Let me find my video so I can post it, because I have to post it now because I lost all my subscribers because I lost my channel. And I gotta try to make up for it. Okay, got it. Here we go. I gotta post my video all around. Excuse me. Okay. We might spend some time on this. We might spend some time on Mormonism. Actually, we might spend a long time on Mormonism. I have a lot of stuff that I found, lots of videos, lots of books, fun stuff. And we have to just see what we're gonna do with it all. I gotta see how much I'm gonna actually do. Okay, that's done. Okay, that's done. And then we're gonna do, give me 1 second, I'm almost done. Okay, and let me just send it to Claire, even though she doesn't come on anymore, but she spreads the link for me. Yeah, Claire abandoned me. It was the reading and the documentaries and stuff. I started losing popularity. And she didn't think it was worth her time anymore coming on because she's looking for media fame. And she's not going to get it here. So, that's that. Anyway, we're going to do an introduction to Mormonism. This document that I have in front of me, why is this like this? Give me 1 second. Let me just look if I can, because I have a document in front of me, but it has some blanks in it. It's like blanks were put into it. I don't understand what happened here. That's really odd. Anyway, I guess I'll just read it with the blanks. There's blanks in it. There's like 2, 3, 4 blanks in every page. So I'm just gonna say blank. Anyway, but this is an introduction to Mormonism, and then I have a 2-part series documentary on Mormonism and Freemasonry. So, okay. Oh, are we gonna get started? I'm drinking my coffee. Do I have anything else I want to say before I start reading, which I kind of don't want to do? Let's just see how many pages this is. I think this is 9 pages. Okay. All right. History of Mormonism. Mormonism, officially called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was founded by Joseph Smith in the early 1800s. Smith was born in 1805 in Vermont. His father was a treasure hunter and money counterfeiter. Ooh, Smith grew up poorly educated and blank. At age 11, his family moved to Palmyra, New York. In 1820, when Smith was 15, there was much interest in religion in Palmyra, and Smith was torn as to what denomination he should join. After reading James 1:5, he prayed about what church he should join and was supposedly visited by God the Father and God the Son. He was told by Jesus he should join none of them, for they were all wrong, and all Christian church doctrines were an abomination. The first vision was supposedly followed by several visits from an angel named Moroni. In 1827, Moroni supposedly allowed Smith to retrieve a set of golden plates which had been buried in a hill near Smith's home in Palmyra, New York. Between 1827 and 1830, Smith, with the help of friends, translated the golden plates into the LDS scripture, the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon was published in 1830 and became the first of many scriptures for the Mormon Church. Smith organized the church in April 6, 1830, with 6 original members. Over the next 10 years, the church headquarters moved to Kinterland, Ohio, Independence, Missouri, and Far West, Missouri, finally landing in Navajo, Illinois between 1839 and 1844. In Navajo, Smith was jailed for encouraging the destruction of a local newspaper and was eventually murdered by a mob in Carthage, Illinois on June 27, 1844. After Smith's murder, several LDS leaders stepped forward to take control of the church. The majority of the Mormon followed Brigham Young to the Salt Lake City, to the Salt Lake Valley. The Mormon Church is organized so that one prophet leads the church. Beneath the prophet in authority is the Council of the 12 Apostles, a third group of men called the First and Second Councils of the 70, like the 70 nations. All of these men were together are called the general authorities. Local churches are called wards or stake centers and meet for worship in what the Mormons call meeting houses. The temples are not the blank, but are for ceremonies for the living and the dead. Less than 10% of all LDS members are allowed to enter these structures. Temples are required for Mormon marriage and for proxy baptism of ancestors. Mormonism teaches that God used to be man or another blank, and that he became a God by following the laws and ordinances of his God and his home world. He brought his wife to his world, a woman he had married on the other world. She's essentially a goddess. In this present God state, he rules our world. He has a body of flesh and bones. Since God and his wife are both exalted persons, they each possess physical bodies. So sounds like idolatry. See, I thought the thing is that Mormonisms don't follow the Trinity, but to say God has a physical body. But this is like going on with Kabbalah and that man can be God. In their exalted state as deities, they produce spirit children that grow and mature in the spirit realm. The first spirit born was Jesus. Afterwards, Lucifer was born along with the rest of us. So Mormonism teaches that we all pre-existed in the spirit realm, having been produced from the union of God and his goddess wife. Therefore, we all existed in spirit from before coming down and entering the bodies of the human babies that are being born on earth. During this compression into the infant state, memories of the pre-existence is veiled. God the Father was called Elohim, was concerned for the future salvation of the people on earth. In the heavenly realm, the Father had a plan for the salvation of the world. Jesus endorsed the Father's plan. Lucifer did not. Lucifer became jealous and rebelled. In his rebellion, he convinced a large portion of the spirits existing in heaven to side with him and oppose God. God, being more powerful than they, cursed these rebellious spirits to become demons. They can never be born in human bodies. The remaining spirits sided with God since they chose the better way. When it comes time for them to live on earth, they have the privilege of being born in races and locations that are relative to their conditions and choices made in the spirit realm. In the Mormon plan of salvation, there needed to be a savior, Jesus. But Jesus was a spirit in heaven. For him to be born on earth, Brigham Young, the second prophet of Mormon in the church, said that instead of letting any other men do it, God the Father did it with Mary. He said that the birth of our Savior was as natural as the birth of our parents. Essentially, what this means is that Brigham Young taught that God the Father came down and had sex with Mary, his spirit daughter, to produce the body of Jesus. Though Young taught and as Though many Mormons will not entertain such incestuous thoughts about God and Mary, this is what Brigham Young taught, and as far as we know, this has not been denied by the Mormon Church. Nevertheless, Jesus was born, got married, and had children. He died on the cross and paid for sins, but not on the cross only. According to Mormonism, the atonement of Christ was not only on the cross, it began in the Garden of Gethsemane before he went to the cross. In Mormonism, men and women have the potential of becoming gods. President Lorenzo Snow said, "As God once was, man is; as God is, man may become." In order to reach this exalted state of godhood, a person must first become a good Mormon, pay full 10% tithes to the Mormon Church, follow various laws and ordinances of the church, and be found worthy. At this point, they receive a temple recommend, whereupon the Mormon is allowed to enter their sacred temple in order to go through a set of secret ritual baptism for the dead, celestial marriage, and various oaths of secrecy and commitment. Additionally, 4 secret handshakes are taught so the believing Mormon, upon entering the third level of Mormon heaven, can shake hands with God in a certain pattern. This celestial ritual is for the purpose of permitting entrance into them. Then he or she will be permitted to have his or her own planet and be the god of his own world, and the Mormon system will be expanded to other planets. This is like so not any kind of stuff I ever heard in Jehovah's Witness. Though, okay, in early Jehovah's Witness, there was stuff like this, like God lived on some star somewhere or whatever. Um, yeah, that like God lived on some star. But this thing about going to other planets and stuff seems a bit odd. Hold on. Okay, let's watch the documentary a little bit.
In his 1831 review of the Book of Mormon, the famous Reformed Baptist preacher and founder of the Disciples of Christ, Alexander Campbell, charged that Joseph Smith had brought together in his Ancient History of America every error and almost every truth discussed in New York for the last 10 years, including even the question of Freemasonry, Republican government, and the rights of man. Jason Whitman, the General Secretary of the American Unitarian Association, said in 1834, "It is well known that in many minds there is a strong feeling of opposition to the institution of Masonry. All such find something in the Book of Mormon to meet their views." Traveler Edward Strutt Abney remarked in 1835 that one passage in this curious Mormon Koran clearly points to the place of its concoction and the prepossessions of its author, for it alludes most unequivocally to the Freemasons. This was not only the observation of non Mormons, for Martin Harris, who had funded publication of the Book of Mormon, also reportedly remarked in March 1831 that the Book of Mormon is the anti Masonic Bible and that all who do not believe in it will be damned. Just what is the basis for these statements? What is Freemasonry? Why were there anti Masons? What exactly does the Book of Mormon have to do with either of them? What can we discover about this forgotten cultural context in which the Book of Mormon appeared? Hi, I'm Dan Vogel. First readers of the Book of Mormon immediately associated its discussion of secret combinations that led to the destruction of both the Nephite and previous Jaredite nations with the current anti-Masonic agitation centered, of all places, in Western New York. Believers also interpreted the Book of Mormon's warning of a latter-day secret combination seeking to overthrow the American government in the context of their current political situation. Of course, apologists have attempted to downplay the significance of this observation with a variety of arguments. In this first video, I will explore the ways in which the Book of Mormon reflected anti-Masonry. And in a second video, I will respond to the apologists' arguments.
Okay, this is interesting. It seems to be saying that Freemasonry or that Mormonism was anti-Freemason. Let's watch it. Let's just get their little blurb because, you know, a lot of these are mixed bags, and that Seventh-day Adventist was started in Freemasonry, but then it went against Freemasonry. Um, ju- I think a lot of we'll find that these religions have a lot of Freemasonry in them, but maybe also some anti-Masonry as well. I think it's going to be. This is a complicated thing to unravel. I can say.
Apparently, Martin Harris was not alone in declaring his belief that the Book of Mormon is the anti-Masonic Bible. According to the Ohio Star, a newspaper published in Ravenna, about 45 miles south of the Mormon capital in Kirtland, the Mormon Bible is anti-Masonic, and it is a singular truth that every one of its followers, so far as we are able to ascertain, are anti-Masons. What were the reasons for Harris and others connecting the Book of Mormon with anti-Masonry? Unfortunately, what the book's first readers took for granted, they did not explain in detail. The purpose of this essay, then, is to place modern readers, so far as possible, in the vantage point of the book's earliest readership. In this video, I will examine the socio-political climate in America at the time the Book of Mormon appeared, and explore the rhetorical dynamic between the book and its first readers. In the process, it is hoped, the Book of Mormon's message, as perceived by those in America in the early 1830s, will be elucidated. When the Book of Mormon came off the press in March 1830, it not only described the entire destruction of two ancient American civilizations, but also contained ominous and foreboding predictions concerning latter-day America's own national calamity. The Book of Mormon spoke directly to its American readers and warned of destruction by secret combinations. After describing the secret societies responsible for the downfall of both Nephite and Jaredite civilizations, Moroni warns Jacksonian America to repent and suffer not that these murderous combinations shall get above you, which are built up to get political power and economic gain, lest the work of destruction come upon you, yea, even the sword of justice of the eternal God shall fall upon you to your overthrow and destruction. Moroni further warns, whatsoever nation shall uphold such secret combinations to get power and gain, until they shall spread over the nation, behold, they shall be destroyed. That Moroni may have had a specific group in mind is indicated by his additional warning to Jacksonian America. The Lord commandeth you, when ye shall see these things come among you, that ye shall awake to a sense of your awful situation because of this secret combination, which shall be among you, or woe be unto it, because of the blood of them who have been slain. For they shall cry from the dust for vengeance upon it, and also upon those who build it up. For it cometh to pass that whosoever buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. Wherefore I, Moroni, am commanded to write these things, that evil may be done away. At the time of the Book of Mormon's publication, The term secret combinations was used almost exclusively to refer to Freemasonry and had become laden with anti-Masonic connotation. On March 29, 1827, the Morgan investigator at Batavia, New York, declared, "Beware of secret combinations. These are the words of General George Washington. Do not these words point with an index that cannot be mistaken to the Society of Freemasons?" The same year, Solomon Southwick, editor of the National Observer at Albany, New York, published a solemn warning against Freemasonry, in which he repeated the statement from another newspaper. When we hear him, Washington, uttering a farewell warning to his countrymen to beware of secret combinations, what are we to suppose he means? What secret combination existed in our country at that time except Masonry? Actually, Washington himself was a Mason and had warned of combinations, but these editors added secret to make it unmistakable. Anyone in Joseph Smith's cultural milieu using the term with a non-Masonic meaning would certainly be misunderstood. Little wonder, then, that numerous individuals in Jacksonian America immediately made the same connection that Martin Harris had. As Mormonism began to grow in the Ohio Reserve, the Book of Mormon's politics became an issue in the local papers. In March 1831, Ohio's Painesville Telegraph criticized the exaggerated claim that Mormonism is the anti-Masonic religion because all who have embraced it are anti-Masons, which wasn't true. Perhaps fearing Mormonism's chance for increased popularity in the strongly anti-Masonic counties of Ohio, editor Eber D. Howe initially tried to reverse this impression by associating Mormonism with the unpopular Masonic institution. The Telegraph thus pointed out that there were among the Mormons in Kirtland some zealous Masons, and that the Mormon Bible was printed and sent forth to the world from a Masonic printing office. In May 1832, the Geauga Gazette countered Howe's statement by reporting that W. W. Phelps, a prominent Mormon who had been editor of the Anti-Masonic Phoenix of Ontario, New York, before his conversion to Mormonism, was one of the most zealous and self-styled patriotic anti-Masons of his day. The Gazette continued, "Here we see Mormonism walking in close upon the steps of political anti-Masonry. How far this is the case in this section, we are not positively informed. In the state of New York, most of the Mormons that we knew were first anti-Masons." Later, Howe reversed his opinion when he became more familiar with the contents of the Book of Mormon. In his 1834 book, Mormonism Unveiled, Howe observed that the Nephites are represented as being anti-Masons, which carries with it some evidence that the writer foresaw the politics of New York in 1828 to 29. Many others in Jacksonian America arrived at the same conclusion. Despite efforts by Mormon apologists to detract from the observations of the book's first readers, the Book of Mormon itself tends to reinforce the consensus of its original audience. In view of Nephi's statement that his prophecies and discussions of the future would be of great worth to Jacksonian Americans, for in that day shall they understand them, as well as his expressed concern for plainness, I think it is a serious mistake to discount the virtually unanimous view of those in Jacksonian America that the Book of Mormon was describing and warning them of the political dangers of Freemasonry. If those in Jacksonian America were wrong about the book's anti-Masonic politics, then the book fell far short of its intended goal of plainness, since virtually everyone misunderstood its message. Actually, the Book of Mormon's anti-Masonic appeal runs much deeper than any of the recent discussions are willing to admit. It is likely that Harris saw in the Book of Mormon much more than a warning of secret combinations to justify his assertion that it was the anti-Masonic Bible. Indeed, close examination of the book's contents reveals that various aspects of its political views would have found favor with anti-Masons. But before discussing the book's anti-Masonic appeal, it will be helpful to review some of the major political issues which divided Americans in the election of 1828, particularly the perceptions of the anti-Masons.
What happens when the prostate enlarges and the urine channel gets tight? If you have an enlarged prostate, do this.
The Book of Mormon appeared at a time when many in America were seriously questioning the survival of the young republic. When Joseph Smith sat down with his scribe, Martin Harris, on April 12, 1828, to dictate the history of a fallen people, the nation was in the midst of an election in which the future of the United States seemed to be held in the balance. By the time Smith had finished dictating his History of Ancient America in June 1829, General Andrew Jackson, the hero of the War of 1812 and famed Indian fighter from Tennessee, had been elected 7th President of the United States over incumbent John Quincy Adams, and had occupied the office for less than 2 months amid predictions of national disaster. Religious conservatives worried that Jackson's views on the separation of church and state, among other things, would incur divine displeasure on the United States. The election of Jackson was the culmination of a major shift in the balance of power in the nation. With the relaxing of property qualifications for voting and the discontinuance of religious tests in several of the states, more and more the voice of the common man was heard in the elections. Moreover, every year the West was growing in population and political power, and those of the old political elite watched in horror as control slipped from their hands with each succeeding election. The trend was clearly discernible in the election of 1824, when Jackson, who seemed to embody the traits elitists in Washington most feared about the younger states, had missed the presidency by 1 vote in the House of Representatives. Despite this setback, conservatives could only delay the inevitable, and many believed the election of 1828 had brought the nation to the edge of a precipice, where at the polls the nation could either retain in office the well-born and well-educated political elite and save the republic, or push it off into the abyss of mob rule. On January 11, 1828, the Wayne Sentinel, a newspaper edited by Edward B. Grandin and published near the Smith residence in Manchester, New York, reported that many feared Jackson's popular support, together with the likelihood of his election, were the harbingers of ruin and the indication of the early downfall of this great republic. On May 30th, that same year, the Sentinel reported on the speech of Secretary of State Henry Clay, in which he implored a Baltimore audience to solemnly pause and contemplate the precipice which yawns before us. If Jackson is elected, he said, it would incur divine displeasure, and God might find it necessary to chastise this people with the rod of his vengeance. Soon, Jackson's opponents began suggesting just how God's displeasure would be displayed. On July 11, 1828, the Sentinel reported that the opponents of Jackson were declaring that the crisis has arrived and that the elevation of General Jackson to the presidency is only the first step, the entering wedge to the dissolution of the Union. The opponents of the general, the pro-Jackson Sentinel, continued, have attempted to keep the minds of the people alarmed by dwelling upon a more momentous topic, the dissolution of this beautiful chain of sister states and the extinction of all our bright hopes and anticipation of the future prosperity of this proud republic. And all these political stratagems, maneuvers, and conclusive efforts that those now at the head of our nation may be retained in their places against the free, unbiased will of the people. Jackson was the first president elected from the West. His ascendancy to the presidency symbolized the hopes and ambitions of the less privileged classes, and they descended in droves upon the District of Columbia on the 4th of March, 1829, to participate in his inauguration. It was a proud day for the people, Kentucky newspaperman Amos Kendall wrote. General Jackson is their own president. But Justice Joseph's story was less enthusiastic. The reign of King Mob seemed triumphant, he murmured. Clearly, there was a difference in perception. It was a dark day for conservatives, who looked to the dawning of a new age with great apprehension and uneasiness. Of course, the vast majority of Americans had either supported Jackson or gracefully accepted his victory as the result of the democratic process. But there was a significant minority who were not so optimistic, who could only see national ruin, perhaps even apocalypse. John Randolph of Roanoke described the situation just before Jackson's inauguration. "The country is ruined past redemption," he cried in despair. "It is ruined in the spirit and character of the people," and he saw little hope for the future. Conservative oracles continued to issue their doomsday predictions throughout Jackson's 2 terms. "I think that our experiment of self-government approaches to a total failure," declared William Sullivan of Massachusetts in 1832. "My opinion is," said Chancellor James Kent in 1835, "that the government and character of this country are going to ruin. We are going to destruction," he mournfully predicted in 1837. "All checks and balances and institutions in this country are threatened with destruction from the ascendancy of the democracy of numbers and radicalism and the horrible doctrine and influence of Jacksonianism." Such were the lamentations of the passing order. Thus, the Book of Mormon appeared at a time when the stress of transition was at its highest point. Various scholars have already recognized in the Book of Mormon a rejection of various Jacksonian principles. To a certain extent, the book might be seen as echoing conservative lamentations and Jeremiah's of destruction. I now turn my discussion to a very special anti-Jackson group, the Anti-Masons. The campaign of 1828 had been one of the nastiest in American history. Jackson had been assailed in the press as a murderer and an adulterer. One line of attack involved his affiliation with Freemasonry, a secret fraternal organization that traces its origin to the stonemason guilds of 17th century Britain and Europe. Members are initiated into Masonry and pass through various degrees and ceremonies that include key words, hand grips, and blood oaths. Jackson's Masonic affiliation was particularly exploited in Western New York, which had been the scene of intense anti-Masonic agitation after William Morgan, a disaffected Mason from Batavia, about 50 miles west of the Smiths' home in Manchester, had mysteriously disappeared in 1826 and was suspected to have been the victim of a Masonic plot to prevent him from publishing a book exposing their secrets, which nevertheless appeared posthumously the following year. When indictments were handed down against a number of Masons and only a few were convicted and given light sentences, many surmised that the government had been infiltrated by members of the secret organization who were protecting the guilty. On January 1st, 1827, the anti-Masonic Batavia Advocate complained, "We have waited in vain for the tardy steps of justice to overtake the villain, but his steps are too slow and his arm too feeble." Soon the frustration and anger escalated and exploded into a spontaneous eruption of grassroots meetings where citizens, like those in Genesee County, demanded the exclusion of all Masons from public office. Only 6 weeks after Morgan's disappearance, the citizens of Leroy resolved to withhold votes from any candidate for public office who has in any way aided, assisted, or approved of those late outrages and does not publicly condemn them. After wondering, is it the result of accident that the Masons hold all the offices, govern the presses, and control the administration of justice? The Batavia Advocate concluded, "We must resort to the polls of the election."
Switch now to Fios 2 gig, our fastest internet ever.
Look, I finally cut the cable, switched to Fios 2.
When it was discovered that Jackson had served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Tennessee, supporters of Adams in New York quickly exploited the situation by attempting to draw the Masonic issue along factional lines. Thurlow Weed, anti-Mason and anti-Jackson, established in Rochester the Anti-Masonic Inquirer in February 1828, which consistently associated Jacksonians with Masonry. When supporters of Jackson in Wayne County met for a convention, the Wayne Sentinel reported on 15th of August, 1828, that conservatives were spreading the false rumor that it was a Masonic meeting and designed for the benefit and promotion of Masons. The association of Jacksonians with Masonry evidently persisted in New York to reappear as an issue in the 1830 state elections, as is evident from a Wayne County anti-Masonic broadside dated November 1830, which matter-of-factly referred to the Jacksonian Masonic Republican Party. On April 9, 1830, the Wayne Sentinel complained that it is astonishing to see with what unblushing impudence the antis call the Republican Party a Masonic party. The union of the politically powerful Jacksonians and their militaristic leader with the murderous secret combination of Masonry must have become for at least some New York conservatives the ultimate possible danger to their liberties and freedoms. On November 17, 1828, the anti-Jackson, anti-Masonic Palmyra Freeman declared that Masonry was a secret combination to destroy liberty and religion. With Masonry, the Freeman continued, public confidence is destroyed. The laws of the land.
I find that interesting, to destroy liberty and religion. When we read Secular by Design by Alan Cecil, it seems like what is the wait. Hello? Why isn't this working? Hello? Hello? Okay, yeah, it wasn't working before. Okay, the thing I wanted to bring up was that he said that it's anti-religion, it's against liberty and religion, where we learned in Secular by Design that basically there's factions of Noahidism that want to get rid of all forms of religion and spirituality, right? And I guess, yeah, that is the point, to get rid of religion, of Noahidism. Just wanted to add that in there.
Land set at defiance and the liberties of the people put in jeopardy. On December 2nd, the Freeman warned what would happen should Masonry get the upper hand in the elections. What will the people of this country think of themselves 10 or 20 years hence, if they should suffer themselves to be duped and do not now unite hand and heart to put down a secret society which, if again suffered to get fairly the ascendancy, will crush them and their liberties together? The Jackson ticket in Ohio has prevailed by a majority of about 4,000. The cause of this unexpected result should be immediately made known to the public. It is suspected that Masons have done much behind the curtain. They act in a secret manner and exert a powerful influence in all our elections. Our government and country will be destroyed unless the people put down Masonry root and branch. It is exerting a most baneful influence on our civil and religious privileges. During the 1828 campaign, the Wayne Sentinel repeatedly accused the Adams administration of trying to exploit the situation in Western New York with regard to the Masonic issue. An honest and pure excitement on the subject of Masonry, the Sentinel stated, has, by base and designing men, been converted into a great political engine to benefit the reigning administration. Anti-Masons joined with other conservatives in opposing Jacksonianism on two major issues. By 1827, Van Burenites in New York had taken up the states' rights position and supported Jackson during the election. Most anti-Masons, on the other hand, supported Adams and his Federalist policies. Anti-Masons were also opposed to the Jacksonian insistence on the complete separation of church and state, or the theory of religious non-interventionism. Jacksonians refused to support national fast and prayer days or to participate in special congressional prayer meetings, and actively opposed the Sabbatarians petitioning Congress for the discontinuance of Sunday mail. Anti-Masons, on the other hand, generally supported the Federalist Whig theory of national religion and eventually joined with the movement inspired by the sermon delivered on the 4th of July, 1827, by Ezra Stiles Ely, pastor of the Third Presbyterian Church of Philadelphia, in which he proposed that there should be established a Christian party in politics. By 1830, observes one historian of the anti-Masonic crusade, the anti-Masons felt that they had translated Ely's dream into reality. The Albany Argus complained in 1830 that the anti-Masons wanted to inquire into every man's religious opinions and to reduce all to a particular creed, and the Working Man's Advocate charged in 1830 that political anti-Masonry is neither more nor less than a church and state intrigue. Anti-Masons shared with Jacksonians populist and egalitarian rhetoric and declared in 1828 their opposition to the monster institution of Masonry, which had created odious aristocracies by its obligations to support the interests of its members, in preference to others of equal qualifications. However, despite Jacksonian egalitarian rhetoric, anti-Masons in New York linked them with the Van Burenites and the autocratic oppressors. The campaign of 1828.
Okay, let's read a little bit. Hello? Oh my gosh, this is not good. Hello? 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 Okay, yeah, that's not good, but anyway, let's read let's keep reading a little bit from the introduction to Mormonism. So, source of authority. Mormons accept 4 books as scripture. Mormons believe that the canon of scripture was not closed when the Bible was completed. They believe the Bible is the word of God, but deny that it has been translated correctly and believe that it has been something since the days of apostles or edited since the days of the apostles. In addition to the Bible, Mormonism believes that the Book of Mormon, Doctrines and Covenants, the Pearl of Great Price, all contain God's revelation. Whenever a Mormon belief contradicts the Bible, Mormons say that the particular book of the Bible is translated incorrectly and that the correct doctrine is one of the Mormon scriptures. Thereby, the Bible is rejected as the infallible word of God. The Book of Mormon tells the story of supposed migration of Israelites in 600 BCE to the American continent, but does not contain explicit Mormon doctrine. These Israelites subsequently lapsed into apostasy through their story, although their story was preserved on golden plates written in Reformed Egyptian. Joseph Smith supposedly translated the plates by the gift and power of God. However, Reformed Egyptian does not exist as a language. The golden plates were returned to the angel Moroni after they were transcribed, and Moroni returned them to heaven. There were no reliable witnesses who saw the tablets. There have been over 2,000 corrections made to the Book of Mormon since the original publication. This is strange since Smith claimed that the translation was divinely given. In addition, Smith provided several prophecies that did not come true, showing himself to be a false prophet according to Deuteronomy 8:21. And Jeremiah, Deuteronomy 18:21-22 and Jeremiah 28:9. Doctrines and Covenants contain blank of the Mormon prophets, 138 in number, along with 2 declarations. So Doctrine and Covenants must contain the laws of the doctrines of the prophets, 138 in number, along with 2 declarations. Here, most Mormon doctrine can be found, including the priesthood, baptism for the dead, godhood, and polygamy. The Pearl of Great Price contains Smith's religious history, Smith's articles of faith, the Book of Abraham, and the Book of Moses. Hold on. Nature of God. Essentially, Mormonism is a something blank God humanizing religion. Mormonism teaches that God the Father is a resurrected, exalted human being named Elohim, who at one time was not a God. Rather, he was once a mortal man on another planet who through obedience to the precepts of his God, eventually attained exaltation or godhood himself. The Mormon God is located in time and space, has a body of flesh and bone, and thus is neither spirit nor omnipresent. Mormonism teaches that God increases in knowledge, and consequently, God does not have absolute and total knowledge. Mormonism also teaches that God over this world is one in an infinite lineage of gods. In the Mormon universe, God is not responsible for creating or sustaining matter, energy, natural laws, human personhood, moral principles, nor the process of salvation or exaltation. In fact, instead, the universe being subject to him, who is the biblical view, the Mormon God is subject to the universe. Yeah, this sounds a little bit more like Kabbalah, right? Interesting. Person and works of Jesus. Mormons believe that Jesus is a God. I thought they didn't believe in the Trinity. They also believe that Lucifer, the demons, and all mankind are all spirit brothers and sisters born in the spirit world as spirit babies to Elohim and his goddess wives. Mormon leaders have consistently taught that God the Father had sexual relationships on earth with Mary, his own spirit daughter, to produce the physical body of Jesus. Early Mormon apostles also asserted that Jesus was a blank and that his wife included Mary and Martha, the sister of Lazarus, and Mary Magdalene. Must mean polygamous. Jesus was a polygamist and had more than one wife. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as well as on the cross, Jesus atoned for Adam's sins and guaranteed all humankind resurrection and immortality. Jesus visited the Israelites or Indians of North America after his resurrection and established the blank church among them. Some, maybe the Mormon church among them, some kind of church. The nature of God. Oh, this is going to go by really quickly. Mormonism claims that humans, as spirit children in heaven, who are later given bodies to live on earth so that they may progress to Godhead. Mormonism teaches that pre-existent humans made choices as spirit children and that determined whether or not they would come to earth. Those who were obedient received physical bodies. The Mormonism teaches that the humans can become gods through obedience to Mormon teaching and obeying the church and the prophets. Means of salvation. Mormon theology teaches that the atonement of Christ was essential to our salvation and eternal life with God. That is, it is not blank. Christ shed blood on the cross provide. Wait, Mormon theology teaches that the atonement of Christ was essential to our salvation and eternal life with God, but that it is not something blank. Christ shed blood on the cross provides for eternal resurrection of all people, but does not pay for his personal sins. According to Mormonism, only Christ's blood shed in the Garden of Gethsemane atones for personal sin. Only the most faithful Mormons have godhood or enter the celestial kingdom. In order to obtain this ultimate step, Mormons must exercise faith in the God of Mormonism, its Christ and Church of Latter-day Saints, exercise repentance, and be baptized in the LDS Church. Additionally, Mormons must keep the word of wisdom by abstaining from alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine, tithe to the church, attend weekly sacrament meetings, support the Mormon prophet, do temple work, and be active in the support of the church. Mormonism also teaches that one must be baptized in water to be saved, and that salvation will also be available in the next world for those missing out in this one. Therefore, Mormons avidly pursue genealogy and practice baptism of the dead. Okay. So I think that means it's it's okay. You don't just get into heaven by faith in Jesus Christ. You actually have to do things which these Christians seem to hate. And as soon as you ask these Christians to actually enforce any kind of laws, they start getting really pissed off. Okay, that was a little bit less uh meaty than what I thought, but we have other things to read. So anyway, let me continue with the documentary, and we'll probably go with that for a while I look for something else to read because we're done with this and it's only 12, so.
8 was remembered by some as the most exciting in New York's history. It was an election that swung previously evenly divided counties strongly for one ticket or the other. Many Masons felt compelled to support Jackson regardless of their political preferences, while anti-Masons who were politically divided became enthusiastic supporters of Adams. Although Jackson won the election, anti-Masonry proved to be an effective weapon for the Jacksonian campaign suffered in New York, especially in the western counties. Historian Lee Benson observed, instead of showing that Jackson enjoyed great popularity in New York, the returns show that he barely squeaked through to victory with 51% of the votes. The Nephite record keepers believed that their account of the destruction of two ancient American civilizations would be a timely and urgent message for latter-day America. What had happened in ancient America was about to happen again in Jacksonian America. The Book of Mormon's narrative of the rise and fall of both the Nephite and Jaredite nations thus contained a subtle message for latter-day Americans. Martin Harris and other early readers were therefore encouraged by the Book of Mormon itself to push their anti-Masonic interpretations beyond the book's direct warning of secret combinations and to make comparisons. The Book of Mormon not only explicitly warns Jacksonian Americans about secret combinations then threatening to bring down destruction upon their nation, but it also combines the concept of religion and politics with the concept of social and political equality in a way that only the anti-Masons could appreciate. While Jacksonians would no doubt have applauded the Book of Mormon's defense of social and political equality, they would have certainly deplored its concept of the church and state relationship, as well as its anti-factional stance. Thus, strict Jacksonians would have found very little to recommend in the Book of Mormon. Conversely, supporters of Adams, ex-Federalists, and other conservatives would have been attracted to the Book of Mormon's description of the strongly centralized Nephite government, as well as its blend of religion and politics, but they would have seen as incompatible the book's defense of political and economic equality. The Book of Mormon thus combines the following favorite anti-Masonic elements in its description of the decline and fall of the Jaredite and Nephite nations. 1. The ascendancy of secret combinations. 2. The rejection of religious leadership. 3. The loss of social and political equality. And 4. The fragmentation of a centralized government. A closer examination will reveal how the Book of Mormon weaves these elements into its account of the disintegration of the Nephite and Jaredite civilizations. According to the Book of Mormon, the ideal government is one which is led by a prophet king. This ideal is exemplified by Nephi, Benjamin, and Mosiah, all of whom rule by divine right. However, after suffering through the reign of the tyrant King Noah and having no legitimate successor, King Mosiah set up a system of higher and lower judges who were to judge the people according to the laws which had been given by the hand of the Lord. These judges were appointed according to the voice of the people, with the promise that if the time comes that the voice of the people doth choose iniquity, then is the time that the judgments of God will come upon you. The prophet editor, Mormon, guides his readers through nearly 1,000 years of Nephite history, where this principle is borne out repeatedly. The ideal under Mosiah's theocracy was initially achieved, for he was appointed chief judge while at the same time being high priest over the church. Not only did Mosiah's government combine the concept of religion and politics with a strong central government, but it also attempted to establish social and political equality. When Mosiah explained the principles of his new government to his people, they relinquished their desire for a king and became exceedingly anxious that every man should have an equal chance throughout all the land. Interestingly, the first secret society to appear among the Nephites occurs about 52 BCE during a hotly contested election. Peharan II, Pecumeni, and Payanki each wanted to succeed their recently deceased father as chief judge and governor of the people of Nephi. When Paharan II was appointed by the voice of the people, Payanki and his supporters rose up in rebellion and sought to destroy the liberty of the people. However, when the coup was discovered, Payanki was condemned to death. His followers sent Kishkumen to murder Paharan II and entered into a covenant to keep the assassin's identity secret. After Paharan's murder, Pakumenai was appointed as chief judge. Meanwhile, Kishkumen and his band went underground only to resurface a year later with a new plot to assassinate the chief judge, Helaman I, who had succeeded Pakumenai after he had been killed in battle with the Lamanites, and to place Gadianton in the judgment seat. If successful, Gadianton would be in a position to help his band infiltrate the Nephite government. However, the plot was discovered by one of Helaman's servants, and Kishkumen was killed. Helaman's servant had learned of their secret plan and their combination from Kishkumen himself, who freely divulged details of the plot after Helaman's servant gave unto him a sign. Helaman immediately called martial law against the band of robbers and secret murderers. When Kishkumen did not return, Gadianton soon realized that his secret organization had been breached, and they took their flight out of the land by a secret way into the wilderness. About 26 BCE, Gadianton's band murdered the chief judge and his son. By this time, the band had returned from the wilderness, and a majority of the Nephites had joined with them. Mormons' description of their secret oaths and subversive tendencies is reminiscent of anti-Masonic rhetoric. The Nephites did unite with those bands of robbers and did enter into their covenants and their oaths that they would protect and preserve one another in whatsoever difficult circumstances they should be placed, that they should not suffer for their murders and plunderings and stealings. They did have their signs, yea, their secret signs, and their secret words, and this, that they might distinguish a brother who had entered into the covenant, that whatsoever wickedness his brother should do, he should not be injured by his brother, nor by those who did belong to his band, who had taken this covenant. And thus they might murder and plunder and steal and commit whoredoms and all manner of wickedness, contrary to the laws of their country and also the laws of God. There are two anti-Masonic elements in this quote from Helaman which deserve attention. First, anti-Masons charge that the Masonic oaths were designed to protect their brethren from the lash of the civil laws, whether guilty or not guilty, treason and murder not excepted. And although they may be obliged to swear falsely to clear the guilty brother, they must do it or incur the penalty of secret death. Masons themselves understood that their secret tokens were used by our ancient brethren to distinguish a friend from foe. Second, anti-Masons believed that Masonry subverted both secular and sacred law. The Reverend John Glazer Stearns, in his book An Inquiry into the Nature and Tendency of Speculative Freemasonry, first published in 1826, remarked, "Those laws which support the Masonic system demand and take the life of a fellow creature without any reference to the laws of God or the land." Describing the abduction of William Morgan, one contemporary anti-Masonic source used the following words: "Fired with the indignation at him who had apostatized from their favorite principles, they rushed forth in the right of their fury, bidding defiance to the laws of their country and the laws of their God, resolved upon the single intent, dire vengeance." Mormon's account of the fate of the Gadianton apostates must have seemed to the early readers like a commentary on the Morgan affair. Whosoever of those who belonged to their band should reveal unto the world their wickedness and their abominations should be tried, not according to the laws of their country, but according to the laws of their wickedness, which had been given by Gadianton and Kishkumen. By 24 BCE, the secret band did obtain the sole management of the government, but was eventually eradicated when Nephi II, through prophetic gift, exposed the corrupt judges who had murdered the chief judge. The Gadianton band was swept off insomuch that they have become extinct. This was one ending to the secret combination scenario, provided the people listened to God's prophets. After a brief period of prosperity and social harmony, the people began to be lifted up unto pride and boastings because of their exceeding great riches. For there were many merchants in the land, and also many lawyers and many officers. And the people began to be distinguished by ranks according to their riches. Thus there became a great inequality in all the land. About 29 CE, a family-based secret society began to protect corrupt judges who were secretly executing the prophets illegally. This secret society eventually murdered the chief judge and set a king over the land, Jacob, who was one of the chiefest who had given his voice against the prophets who testified of Jesus. Under Jacob's leadership, the Nephite nation divided into tribes, each governed by its own leader and laws. In this condition, many Nephite cities were destroyed at the time of Christ's crucifixion, including the headquarters of the secret society headed by Jacob. Only the righteous were left to greet the resurrected Jesus. This is how the secret combination scenario could end when the people reject the words of the prophets. Was latter-day America destined for a similar fate? Did Martin Harris and others in Jacksonian America associate Jacob's leadership with that of Jackson? Indeed, Jacob reflected some of the same traits for which anti-Masons feared Jackson. His Masonic membership, his military chieftanism, his states' rights position, and his apparent lack of concern for the spiritual welfare of the nation. Was this the fate of the nation with Jackson as president? John H. Gilbert, who was principal typesetter for the Book of Mormon, recalled that Martin Harris was something of a prophet. He frequently said that Jackson would be the last president that we would have, and that all persons who did not embrace Mormonism in 2 years would be stricken off the face of the earth. 2 years later, however, when it appeared that Jackson would be re-elected, Harris extended his prediction another 4 years. The golden age of the Nephites occurs after the wicked are destroyed, and a theocratic government is set up under the leadership of apostles. A strongly centralized government administered a system of social equality, whereby they had all things in common among them. Therefore, there were not rich and poor, bond and free, but they were all made free. However, about 245 CE, after 200 years of social harmony and peace, the Nephite society began to be lifted up in pride, such as the wearing of costly apparel. And from that time forth, they did have their goods and their substance no more in common among them. And they began to be divided into classes. And the wicked part of the people began to build up the secret oaths and combinations of Gadianton. And the robbers of Gadianton did spread over all the face of the land. The nation again divided into tribes, and apostasy and sin abounded. About 385 CE, the Nephite civilization finally collapsed under the relentless military onslaught of the robbers and the Lamanites. Moroni's abridgment of the record of Ether also describes the role that secret societies played in the destruction of Jaredite civilization. After a brief period of peace, there began to be robbers in the land, and they adopted the old plans and administered oaths after the manner of the ancients, and sought again to destroy the kingdom. The Lord sent prophets to warn them of impending destruction, but they did reject all the words of the prophets because of their secret society and wicked abominations. However, this secret society succeeded in dividing the kingdom and causing a civil war that ended in the total annihilation of the Jaredite civilization. The Book of Mormon seems to reflect the concerns of anti-Masons and anti-Jacksonians that his election would result in civil war and, as the Wayne Sentinel reported in 1828, the dissolution of the Union. It was a subject of increasing concern to Mormons. Only months following the Book of Mormon's publication, Joseph Smith received a revelation which commanded the saints in western New York to move to Ohio. The move was in part inspired by the fear of secret combinations and the breakout of war in the East. This theme continued to receive attention by Joseph Smith as national events seemingly worked towards fulfillment. On November 24th, 1832, the South Carolina legislature, responding to the Federal Tariff Acts of 1828 and 1832, passed laws to implement the Ordinance of Nullification. President Jackson responded by threatening to use force if necessary to enforce the new laws in rebellious states. These events were being followed very closely by the newspapers, including the Painesville Telegraph, which declared in mid-December that civil war was at hand, and unless some signal interposition shall arrest the course of events, our national existence is at an end. On December 25th, 1832, when this volatile situation seemed certain to explode at any moment into a national Armageddon, Joseph Smith penned his well-known and often quoted prophecy on war, which predicted that civil war would shortly break out in America, escalate into world war, and culminate in the full end of all nations. After the passing of this period of national crisis, Joseph Smith rarely, if ever, spoke of political secret combinations. As viewed from the vantage point of its first readers, the Book of Mormon was much more than a religious history of ancient America. It was also a political commentary and a critique of Jacksonian America. If Harris and others were typical anti-Masons who feared Jackson's rule, the Book of Mormon did little to quell their anxiety. The Book of Mormon, however, was much more than political anti-Masonry and a defense of the Christian party and politics. It does not simply advocate that political leaders should be religious, but rather puts forth the more radical proposition that the ideal political leader should be charismatic or inspired. While the Book of Mormon rejected the Jacksonians as irreligious, it ultimately rejected the Adams administration and other ex-Federalists, even the anti-Masons, as religious hypocrites, members of corrupt churches, and without proper authority to carry out their plans. No one, not even the best anti-Masons, had authority to establish a Christian party in politics.
We could save if we bundle with NJM.
Save us from headaches, too.
The Book of Mormon warns Jacksonian Americans to flee to the theocracy of the New Jerusalem or be destroyed. Thus, early Mormonism was not simply a reflection of political anti-Masonry. If anything, it was a radicalized, charismatic version. In light of Mormonism's radical religious political goals, the comments of New York newspaperman James Gordon Bennett concerning the advent of Mormonism are most interesting. In 1831, he described the effort by a certain class of religionists to stop the mails on Sunday and to turn the tide of public sentiment entirely in favor of blending religious and worldly concerns together. These religious party zealots, Bennett asserted, have endeavored ever since the first settlement of Rochester to organize a religious hierarchy which would regulate the pursuits, the pleasures, and the very thoughts of social life. Bennett believed that Mormonism is a genuine fruit of the same seeds which produced the Sunday Mail movement. From its inception, it was clear that Mormonism was much more than a religious movement. There were perhaps several factors responsible for the absence of anti-Masonic rhetoric among the Mormons after 1832. First, the anti-Masonic party was in rapid decline after the election of 1832, when anti-Masonic candidate William Wirt received only 7 electoral college votes. Second, in the political environment of Ohio, where the Mormons found themselves in counties dominated by national Republicans, later Whigs, the Mormons quickly learned that the best way to break the economic and political hegemony of the Whigs and establish themselves in the area was to support Jackson and his party. Continued use of anti-Masonic rhetoric by Mormon missionaries would have therefore been counterproductive to their political goals in Ohio. Third, by 1835, it was becoming clear to the saints that the millennium was not as imminent as first perceived, and that the abomination of desolation was not going to take place while Jackson was in office. A delay in the Mormon thinking about the millennium took much of the fire out of their millenarian and anti-Masonic rhetoric, and the emphasis turned from apocalypse and gathering to kingdom building and proselytizing. Finally, seeking social and political advantages in Illinois, the Mormon leaders encouraged members to join the Masonic institution and even helped to establish a lodge in Nauvoo. That the Mormons ultimately embraced Masonry in Nauvoo should not be considered any more inconsistent than their support of Jackson in Ohio. In either case, however, Joseph Smith's involvement seems to be a matter of political and social expediency rather than sincere support or belief. Of course, secret societies and conspiratorial plots against the government can be found in every nation and civilization. However, the Book of Mormon itself makes the comparison between the Nephite and Jaredite combinations and those in Jacksonian America. Moreover, there is a noticeable linguistic dependency on anti-Masonic rhetoric in the Book of Mormon's description of ancient secret societies. Even Mormon scholar Blake T. Osler has argued that certain anti-Masonic elements in the Book of Mormon may be explained as Joseph Smith's independent commentary on Masonry, sparked by his reflection on Nephite secret combinations. A separate issue entirely is whether or not the Book of Mormon's description and warning of secret societies threatening Jacksonian America was primarily concerned with Freemasonry, particularly Andrew Jackson and the Freemasons. Many of the Book of Mormon's first readers apparently believed it was. This is a serious problem. The Book of Mormon's prophecies about national destruction in the latter days by secret combinations seems to have gone down in flames along with Joseph Smith's plans to establish a New Jerusalem in Missouri, which was to serve as a place of refuge for believers wishing to escape the approaching Holocaust. But like the mythical phoenix, Smith arose from its ashes to redefine his mission and focus his energies to build the kingdom of God in a more practical way. I'm Dan Vogel. Thanks for watching.
Hello? 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 Hello, there we go. Yeah, there's something wrong with this microphone. Okay, that was part one of what we wanted to see. It was a little bit different than I thought. I mean, it's giving me another avenue to look down, but right now I'm printing out a book, Mormonism and Masonry by S.H. Goodwin. And we're going to go over that. It's going to take a little bit while. Well, you know, I don't have to print the whole thing at once, but I can start reading whenever it's ready. I can start reading. If you give me a few seconds, I'll start reading. Give me a little bit. I want to take a little break. Yeah, I want to take a little bit break, but we'll start reading this, and then we'll continue with our little documentary, and then I might not spend as much as time on Mormonism as I thought, because I was going through these PDFs, and I don't need to look at them all. But I do want to go through one of the books. There was a really long book, and then there was a shorter book on Mormonism and Freemasonry. So I chose the shorter book, not because I wanted a shorter book, only because I was looking at that longer book, and it had like, kind of like, it was a little bit, it was like the history of Freemasonry, which we already went over, the history of Mormonism, which we already went over. And then it started getting into the differences where, you know, whereas this seems to be a little bit more all about the, you know, the connection between Mormonism and Freemasonry. So I'm printing out this document. And then we'll watch part two of this. There's a part two. of this. So let me actually get that ready. Let me actually get this ready.
You might be asking yourself, can you actually create high quality live streams for free? Well, with StreamYard, the answer is
Okay, getting that ready. Let me make a cup of coffee. Somebody's watching. Okay, at least somebody's watching. Let me just make a cup of coffee, my last cup of coffee that I'm allowed to have. What's today? Thursday. Yay. It's Thursday. That means I'm going to work another 3 days. I'm working 6 days a week now. Okay, let's see if this finished printing. Okay, give me 1 second. Let me just make sure I have this whole thing, this whole book. Mormonism and Freemasonry by S.H. Goodwin. And I think that this was produced by the church, or it was, I mean, it was either produced by the lodge or by a church. Give me 1 second. Let me look. Ooh. Oh no, it didn't do the whole thing, did it? Give me 1 second. Where did this stop printing? Actually, I think it's still printing. It is still printing. It's not done, that's why. How much fucking further does this have to go? Is this like only 40 pages? Give me 1 second, I'm just doing something. I'm shocked by this. How many times did I print this? Give me 1 second. One second. Okay. Okay, got it. I got the whole thing. Oh no. Did I just ruin this? I didn't just ruin this. Please tell me I didn't just ruin this. This is fine. Yeah, this is fine. Okay. I have the book Mormonism and Masonry by S. H. Goodwin. Got it. We're ready. We're ready to start. And okay. Just give me a second. Let me finish getting my coffee in order. Here it is. And let me just get a clip to bind the paper together so we can start reading. Let's bind the paper together. Let's see, that might be a little bit difficult to deal with. It might be. So, okay. Okay. All right. Mormonism and Masonry by S. H. Goodwin. Okay. Let's read the introduction. Place is made here for a brief discussion of several disconnected, though essential particulars, which cannot well be represented in the chapters that follow. The first contact of Mormonism and Masonry antedate the Nouveau period, Nauvoo, period, Nauvoo, Illinois, period, by somewhat more than 15 years. In fact, the present writer is convinced that the years which saw the preparation and publication of the Golden Bible of this new faith also witnessed the very material prenatal influence of Masonry upon Mormonism, proof of which lies thickly sprinkled over the pages of the Book of Mormon. This phase of the subject has been treated elsewhere and at some length by the writer of these lines, and only so much of the story will be repeated here as many seem to be necessary to provide needed background for certain facts in the present study. In September 1826, one William Morgan disappeared from his home in Batavia, New York, and so far as reliable records show, was never thereafter seen by family or friends. But for two circumstances, this incident would have attracted no more than passing notice, for William Morgan was not a man in whom movements or fortunes the public was likely to have any particular interest. But gossip had it that he was at work on an expose of masonry, and that Miller, the proprietor of the local newspaper, was to print the book and share in the profits of the venture. Rumor was also responsible for the information that certain Freemasons, members of the lodge in that village, had vowed that Morgan's book should never see the light of day. These, in conjunction with subsequent events closely connected there within, were the immediate cause of that unparalleled outburst of anti-Masonic excitement, which had been slowly prepared for 2 decades or more, that swept the people of Western New York far beyond the pale of reason, spread west and south and east in the devastating course, and wherever it came, it left no person or relationship or institution as it found them. To one at this distance, that episode in our history appears to have been much more than an ebullition of emotion. It had more the aspect of deeply seated disease, a peculiar paranoia, in fact, from which none, whether his rank or attainments, escaped. At Manchester, not many miles distant from Batavia, Joseph Smith Sr. had his home. So far as known, there was nothing in the character of the environment of his family that led one to suppose that any of its members remained untouched by the tremendous agitation which so visibly affected all others. Indeed, from the characteristics of the several members of this family, as these have been detailed by those who are supposed to have first-hand information, they would appear to be peculiarly susceptible to such influences. Joseph Smith Jr., the future prophet, was nearing his 21st year at the outbreak of the Morgan furor. He, in common with his neighbors, he, in common with his neighbors, we must believe, was thoroughly familiar with all the stories afloat, for these tales more and more supplanted every other topic of conversation and fixed the columns of the newspapers of the day. He, with others, no doubt, attended the anti-Mason Masonic mass meeting, which were a frequent occurrence and of increasing and absorbing interest. He must have listened to the highly colored and vicious attacks on the fraternity which marked every public gathering of those days, and many times have witnessed the burlesquing of masonry and the alleged exemplification of various degrees by renouncing Masons. In fact, there is no reason for thinking that his experience would be different in any material particular from the experience of those whose midst he lived. One year, almost two a day from the disappearance of Morgan, and while the excitement occasioned by that event was still moving toward its peak, the golden plates were committed to the keeping of Joseph Smith. The work of translation, however, did not begin for some months. The book made ready for the press and copyright secured by Joseph Smith Jr., author and proprietor, in the later part of June 1829, and was ready for distribution early in the following year. A glance at the dates given 1827 to 1829 shows that while the prophet was busy at his task, the fires of anti-Masonic hatred were burning fiercer and fiercer, for they did not reach their maximum until the Book of Mormon had been given to the world. To the writer, the evidence of the Mormon prophet's reaction to the anti-Masonic disturbance is as clear and conclusive in the Book of Mormon as that which points out beyond controversy the religion in which the book was produced and establishes the character of the religious, educational, and social conditions which constitute the environment of Joseph Smith. The reader is asked to bear in mind the fact of the foregoing paragraphs when weighing the claims made of the supernatural origin of the temple ceremonies. If the writer is not mistaken, those facts suggest a nature and rational explanation for the statement often repeated by church writers and copied by others, to the effect that when the prophet became a Mason, he was able to work right ahead of all of them. In any consideration of the general subject, Mormonism and Masonry, the advocate of the closed door between these organizations will be told by a few, at least, that in maintaining the position he flies squarely in the face of two of the basic principles of our institution. These are its universality and its non-interference with the religious beliefs or opinions of those who seek to enter its portals. But by universality, we do not mean that every man can be or should be a Mason. To take this position is absurd on the face of it. In practice, it would mean that every provision relating to qualifications of petitioners must be swept from codes and bylaws, for they would be meaningless, and that Grand Masters could no longer be harassed for dispensations to permit the application for the degrees of one who is minus the tip of the little finger or whose left leg is a hair's breadth shorter than the right one. Often Masonic orators dwell in glowing terms on the fact that our fraternity is made up of selected material of picked men, and in a very real sense that is true. But that being true in any sense, what becomes of this doctrine of universality? So also with reference to the second ground of criticism, namely that in drawing the line against the admission of members of the Latter-day Saints organization, we are shattering a time-honored principle of Masonry. We are excluding would-be petitioners on account of their religion. A little reflection based upon information that had been derived from investigation will show that such criticism is not well-founded. The phase of the subject cannot be argued here. The reader is referred to the succeeding chapter of this book for evidence in support of this statement, but room must be made for certain observation permanent to the subject. So I guess there was a period of time where the Masons were not letting in Mormons, because this is like the second time that I've read this, that the Freemasons were not letting Mormons in. Interesting. A matter with reference to which there appears to be not a little of confusion in the minds of Masons, quite generally, pertains to the extent and character of the religious requirements which may properly find place in Masonry. With surprising frequency, one hears the statement that Masonry does not concern itself with the beliefs of a petitioner beyond ascertaining that he accepts the one dogma of belief in God. Many teachers of things ascertaining that have accepted what. Many teachings of things Masonic, including Grand Masters, do not hesitate to affirm that our institution keeps hand of off everything touching a man's religious belief. But is that true in practice? This writer ventures to assert that it is not true, and further, he is willing to go on record as holding that if the occasion required it, he could make good his contention by testimony drawn from many of the jurisdictions in which this doctrine is proclaimed, and do this to the satisfaction of the impartial jury. For a suggestive and interesting illustration of the length to which Masonic teachers may go while proclaiming the sole avowed of belief requirement of avowal of belief in the one dogma, the interested craftsman is referred to Mackey's 19th century, 19th, 20th, and 21st landmarks, and he is advised to make a careful analysis of these three propositions. A certain delightful, interesting, and inspiring teacher of teachers has a fascinating chapter under the caption "One a on a certain blindness in human being due to some fragrant chain of association." That chapter heading flashed a signal to the writer as he turned in thought toward the unaccountable attitude of some intelligent people with respect to the matters present in this volume. Reference here is to those Masons who assume that this subject can have only an academic interest for those who do not live in Utah. In other words, that it is of local concern only. Let the fact be borne in mind in passing that the Latter day Saints have missions in practically every state in the Union, that students from this state are to be found in many of the eastern colleges and universities, and that no year passes in the course of which members of this organization do not apply for and receive degrees in one or all the branches of Masonry in some part of these foreign jurisdictions. Space limitation restricted the writer to the briefest possible suggestion by way of indicating the untenableness of the position referred to. It is local, true enough, if clandestine, and the application of Masonic degrees by members of a clandestine organization concern only the craft of a single jurisdiction. If the acceptance of a plurality of gods who are exalted men, including male and female deities, endowed with all the parts of passions of men, including procreative powers, and functioning in this particular meets the requirements of all other jurisdictions. If the Bible on the altar is simply a pleasant memory or a mere vestigial reminder of what once held place in Anglo-Saxon Masonry, long since superseded by the more recent utterances of the living oracles who speak for God and as God, those whose words are of greater value than all the Bibles put together. If the old regulation numbered 4 no longer has any significance, if the old regulation numbered 4 no longer has any if the old regulation numbered 4 no longer has any significance, that specifies as a necessary qualification of one who would be made a Mason that he must be also his own master. How can that requirement be met by one who must admit that another is authorized by any power whatsoever to direct him in all things spiritual and temporal? If these and other considerations of similar import are of no concern to Masonry at large, then it may be true that this is a local matter only, but not otherwise. Okay, so he did bring up something about if the acceptance of a plurality of gods who are exalted men, including male and female deities, endowed with all the parts and passions of men, including procreative powers and functioning in the particular, meets the requirements of all other jurisdictions. Okay, so that kind of like Mormon polytheism, right? A little bit that's going on here. Um, okay, before we're gonna hold on one second. we're going to go back to the video in a second, but I forgot. I should have done this at the very beginning. But go to bewiseasserpents.blogspot.com. Bewiseasserpents.blogspot.com. And bewiseasserpents.blogspot.com. You can see it up. It's up on the screen now. You see there's a section on Judeo-Freemasonry and Mormonism. Okay, so I had done some investigation on my own before reading any of these books. Didn't read any of these books. So, founder of Mormonism, Joseph Smith's parents were members of a secret occult society. Joseph Smith's family were Freemasons. Freemasons say for Mormonism is Freemasonry. Joseph Smith was made a Mason on sight. Joseph Smith was officially inducted into Freemasonry in 1842. Joseph Smith's father was a Freemason. The first 5 presidents of the Mormon Church were all Freemasons. Self-proclaimed secret society occultist Gentile Jews mentored Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith and the early Mormon Church believed Jews should return to Israel. The Book of Mormon strongly hints at pro-Zionism. Joseph Smith sends an emissary to Israel to facilitate the return of the Jews, Masonic symbols of the Mormon Church. Okay, so that was some of the stuff that I had done. So let's watch a little bit of
This
the
changes everything we know about tinnitus.
part 2 of the
Neurologists have found that tinnitus wipes your memory in less than 3.
What was I going to say? That okay, this is part 2 of that Mormonism is anti-Mason, which now we're starting to see that the Masons didn't let them in. I've just shown that there is Mason connections, and I'm going to I have more literature which I will be posting that shows the connection between Mormonism and Freemasonry, but it seems like it's a complicated relationship. It seems like it's a complicated relationship between copying and being disdained by Freemasonry. So they copied it, but they're also disdainful. The Freemasons disdain them. Anyway, let's watch this.
Prior to bearing the gold plates in the 5th century, Moroni warned first readers of the Book of Mormon to awake to a sense of your awful situation because of this secret combination, which shall be among you. For whoso buildeth it up seeketh to overthrow the freedom of all lands, nations, and countries. Commenting on this passage in 1831, disciples of Christ founder Alexander Campbell observed, Moroni laments the prevalency of Freemasonry in the times when his book should be dug up out of the earth. Campbell wasn't alone in identifying the Book of Mormon's discussion of secret combinations with Freemasonry. In 1838, Methodist minister and abolitionist Leroy Sunderland also remarked, "The reader will find frequent allusions in the Book of Mormon to Freemasonry under the names of secret societies, dreadful oaths, and secret combinations." Hi, I'm Dan Vogel. Many researchers and historians have long regarded as obvious the Book of Mormon's reflection of the cultural milieu of early 19th century America, particularly the anti-Masonic controversy that pervaded Western New York during the late 1820s. As discussed in my previous video, the Book of Mormon's frequent discussion of secret combinations, both ancient and modern, was understood by many of its first readers as a reference to Freemasonry. To them, the Book of Mormon's warning seemed either prophetically timely or proof of Joseph Smith's authorship. Disagreeing with Book of Mormon witness Martin Harris, who held that the Gold Bible was also the anti-Masonic Bible, current Mormon apologists argue that the Book of Mormon's warning of a latter-day secret combination, which utilizes secret words and secret signs and attempts to overthrow the freedom of all lands, referred to no specific group, although it obviously reflected anti-Masonic rhetoric at the time and place of the Book of Mormon's appearance. In this video, I will examine 15 of the major arguments that the apologists have put forward in an attempt to overturn the anti-Masonic thesis. Along the way, I hope that my viewers will gain a deeper understanding of the Book of Mormon in its 19th century setting. In his 1984 book, Joseph Smith and the Beginnings of Mormonism, Mormon historian Richard L. Bushman acknowledged a few obvious similarities between the Book of Mormon and anti-Masonic rhetoric, but contended that such parallels are superficial. Mormon scholar Blake T. Osler tried to account for the similarities between the Book of Mormon and its 19th century environment in his 1987 article, The Book of Mormon as a Modern Expansion of an Ancient Source, suggesting that what occurs in the book is Joseph Smith's independent commentary on Masonry, sparked by his reflection on Nephite secret combinations. Disregarding the many early accounts that described Smith's translation method as a mechanical process of reading the English text as it appeared in the stone, Osler embraced a flexible view of translation, in which Smith played an active role as inspired commentator and expander of the ancient text. This enabled him to account for the presence of anti-Masonic rhetoric, while at the same time defending the book's ancient origin. The late D. Michael Quinn not only dismissed the Book of Mormon's anti-Masonic parallels as superficial in his 1987 book, Early Mormonism and the Magic World View, and again in the 1998 revision of his book, but argued that secret combinations actually refers to witchcraft and occult murders, an interpretation that remains unique to him. While rejecting Quinn's novel interpretation, Mormon apologist Daniel C. Peterson was only too happy to repeat some of his criticisms against the anti-Masonic interpretation. In his 1990 Notes on Gadianton Masonry, which was intended as a response to my 1989 essay, Mormonism's Anti-Masonic Bible, Peterson concluded that there is no reason to insist upon a simple one-to-one equation between the Gadianton robbers and any single modern organization. I will now examine each of the apologetic arguments against the anti-Masonic thesis as presented by Bushman, Osler, Quinn, and Peterson. According to Bushman, critics in Joseph Smith's own day made so little of anti-Masonry in the Book of Mormon. Not only is this the first of a series of specious arguments from silence, but it is incorrect as well. As we have seen, many in Smith's day, including Alexander Campbell in 1831, Eber D. Howe and Jason Whitman separately in 1834, Edward Strutt Abdy in 1835, and Leroy Sunderland in 1838 and 1842, among others, identified the Book of Mormon's discussion of ancient secret societies and 19th century secret combinations with Freemasonry. From this, we can see that Bushman is also wrong when he asserts that critics after Campbell neglected the point entirely, since they credited Solomon Spaulding with authorship. Mormon convert Oliver B. Huntington's experience in New York in 1843 demonstrates that this interpretation was far from dead. Huntington recorded that a Mr. Millard said he knew all about Mormonism and what it sprang from. It sprang from Masonry, or the death of William Morgan. That Mormon was derived from the word Morgan. He said he would prophesy in the name of the Lord Jehovah that Mormonism did spring from the death of Morgan. Bushman's assertion that the Spaulding theory overshadowed other explanations is simply untrue. In his 1834 book, for instance, Howe presented both the Spaulding theory and the anti-Masonic interpretation. They were not mutually exclusive, since those who advocated the Spaulding theory usually believed that the manuscript had been reworked by Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, or both. Thus, Bushman overstates his case when he says Campbell himself in time subscribed to the Spaulding theory and dropped the point about Masonry. Campbell's adoption of the Spaulding theory does not necessarily mean he dropped the point about Masonry. Speaking of first-generation Mormons, Bushman argues that the people who knew anti-Masonry and the Book of Mormon in the 1830s made less of the connection than critics today. Another argument from silence, but given the fact that two major anti-Mormon works, Campbell's 1831 Critique and Howe's 1834 book, criticized the presence of anti-Masonry in the Book of Mormon, the lack of a Mormon response is not a good thing. Nevertheless, as early as 1831, no less than Book of Mormon witness Martin Harris declared that the Book of Mormon was the anti-Masonic Bible. In yet another argument from silence, Bushman also asserts that converts paid no attention to anti-Masonry. He does not explain how he knows this, but one should not make too much of such an argument, since it could also be said that early converts paid no attention to teachings on the Godhead, baptism, spiritual gifts, or church government. In fact, the earliest Mormons lived in a culture of biblical supremacy and rarely referenced the Book of Mormon on any subject. As Grant Underwood's 1984 study, Book of Mormon usage in early LDS theology demonstrated.
Can't go? Do this to clear out stuck poop fast. Fiber helps you poop, right?
Bushman argues Lucy Smith, Joseph Smith's mother, said nothing about Masonry, William Morgan, or anti-Masonry in her autobiography. Joseph was equally neglectful. This is hardly significant since Lucy and Joseph are also silent about a host of other important subjects. Not surprisingly, the Smith histories are silent about Joseph's use of a seer stone to hunt buried treasure in Manchester, his 1826 trial for glass looking in South Bainbridge, New York, his participation in Palmyra's debating club, and his involvement with the Methodists as an exhorter, the differing religious views of his parents, and Joseph Sr.'s drinking problem. Considering these lapses, the failure to mention the Morgan excitement of the mid-1820s is hardly significant. Yet we know that the Morgan affair was important and had a negative effect on attendance at Palmyra's Mount Moriah Lodge, which counted Joseph's older brother Hiram as one of its members. By the time Joseph and Lucy wrote their histories in 1838 and 1845, the subject of Masonry and secret combinations had largely disappeared from local and national discourse, as well as from Mormon rhetoric, and anti-Masonry was no longer as important as it once seemed. Bushman complains that the Book of Mormon groups known as Gadianton were not one continuing society like the Masons, but 5 distinct combinations that sprang up among the Nephites and Jaredites. The Book of Mormon actually describes the ebb and flow of the Gadianton bands, depending on the wickedness or righteousness of the Nephite nation, and implies their continuity. Bushman sees the term Gadianton robbers as simply a convenient label for distinct groups, but after Mormon describes the founding of the Gadianton band, he observes that in the end of this book, ye shall see that this Gadianton did prove the overthrow, yea, almost the entire destruction of the Nephite people. Apparently, transmission between the first and second bands was accomplished through records hidden in the earth. Succeeding robber bands claimed Gadianton as their founder and held the belief that their oaths were of ancient date and handed down. The secret societies that appeared among the Nephites after the visit of Jesus and eventually led to their destruction were not independent. For Mormon states that the wicked part of the people began again to build up the secret oaths and combinations of Gadianton. Thus, the Book of Mormon's treatment of ancient secret societies is not as fragmentary as Bushman states. On the other hand, international Freemasonry was not as unitary as Bushman claims, since it was generally recognized to be divided among distinctive orders and rites, with 2 competing Grand Lodges in New York alone. The disunity of Masonry was noted by anti-Masonic minister Henry Dana Ward, who wrote in 1829 that the present convulsed state of Mexico is principally owing to the secret operations of 2 Masonic parties, the York Masons and the Scottish Masons. Ultimately, Bushman's complaint is irrelevant, since it was not imperative that Smith follow either a unitary or diversified history of Masonry. He was free to adapt such cultural borrowings to the requirements of his own work. The historical and literary critic seeks evidence of environmental influence, not exact replication. An author uses his life experiences to create something both familiar and unique, and some differences, especially of traits not considered particularly distinctive, should be expected. Bushman expresses surprise that the murder of the Masonic traitor William Morgan in 1826 had no equivalent in the Book of Mormon. Again, one should not expect an exact duplicate plotline in the Book of Mormon, but Morgan would be portrayed as a hero, not as a traitor. The Reverend David Pease's 1830 sermon provides a good example of how anti-Masons regarded Morgan. More than 100 ministers of the gospel have renounced and denounced Freemasonry, but it was reserved by the providence of God for Captain William Morgan to openly commence the attack upon this potent foe, which had secretly interwoven itself with all our civil, religious, and even domestic concerns. He bravely opened the war against that power, and though he fell as a martyr in the cause, he tore away the strongest pillars. The spell with many was now broken. A ray of light found its way into the chamber of darkness. The Book of Mormon's rhetoric about prophets being martyred at the hands of secret combinations could have been loosely inspired by Morgan's murder. Speaking of the latter-day secret combinations, Moroni warns, "The Lord will not suffer that the blood of the saints, which shall be shed by them, shall always cry unto him from the ground for vengeance." By 1830,
Okay, hold on one second. Hello? Hello, 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 hello? Hello? There we go. Okay. So let's continue with the reading a little bit. At least the reading going slightly with what we're learning right now. So I didn't know about the anti-Mason angle. I never came across this before. It's interesting. It Yeah, it's just making me realize that it's a lot more nuanced. It's a lot less black and white with all of these Christian Science, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventists. Did they come out of Freemasonry? Yes. Could they have also had elements of anti-Masonry in them? Yes. Obviously, whether it was pro or con Masonry influenced these religions. So now we're on chapter 1. That was the introduction. Mormonism and Masonry. Chapter 1. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Chapter 1. Chapter 1, laying foundations, rapid growth, introduction to Masonry, how the step was regarded by Masons elsewhere, forces that unfavorably affected Nauvoo Masonry. In the later part of April 1839, the first steps were taken toward the establishment in Illinois of a semi-theocratic community under the leadership of Joseph Smith, the Mormon prophet. Similar attempts have been made by this teacher of a new faith in Kirkland, Ohio, and at several points in the state of Missouri, all of which had come to a disastrous conclusion. The why of these failures does not lie within the province of these chapters. On the date named, certain of the Mormon leaders came up from Quincy, some 50 miles down the Mississippi River. Whether they had fled from their troubles in Missouri and definitely fixed upon a location for a new settlement, the site of this new Zion included the straggling village of Commerce. On the first day, the initial purchase of the land was made by a committee head by Joseph Smith. Soon other extensive holdings were secured, and a year later, when a post office was established there, the Postmaster General rechristened the place Nauvoo in deference to the wishes of the settlers. To this chosen spot came the saints in large numbers, especially from Missouri, where multiplied troubles had beset them. In consequence of this movement, Nauvoo experienced a phenomenal growth for those times. Within 2 years from the date of the first purchaser of land by Joseph Smith, the population had grown from almost nothing to more than 3,000, and when Grandmaster Jonas instituted Navajo Lodge, March 15th, 1842, between 8 and 10,000 people made their homes there. 3 years later, Nauvoo enjoyed the distinction of being the largest city in the state of Illinois, and with the exception of St. Louis, it had no rival in the Northwest. So this was a Mormon city? Totally. These people, for the most part, came originally from the older section of the country and from foreign lands, more particularly from England, and were largely the fruits of the aggressive missionary policy which has distinguished the church from its inception. Among those who were attracted to the proclamations of this new evangel were a number who were or had been members of the Masonic fraternity. Prominent among these were John C. Bennett, an Ohio Mason, Heber K. Kimball, one of the first apostles and a trusted friend of both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, who had received the degrees at Victor, New York. Hiram Smith, the prophet's older brother, who likewise was a New York Mason, and others. Of this, too, was W. W. Phelps, a renouncing Mason of the anti-Masonic period, and for a time at least a bitter foe of the fraternity. Okay, so it says Hiram Smith, the prophet's older brother, was also a Mason, which I think I wrote in on that website. Earlier in the summer of 1841, these Masons addressed a communication to Bodley Lodge No. 1, located at Quincy, in which they asked for the usual recommendations in order that they might establish a lodge at Nauvoo. This request was denied. The reason assigned by Bodley Lodge behind that, as these persons are unknown to this lodge as Masons. it was thought prudent not to do so. A recent writer informs us that not only was the recommendation withheld, but also the Bodley Lodge protested against the granting of a dispensation to the Nauvoo Brethren. However, that may be on October 15th, 1841, 10 days after the close of Grand Lodge, Grand Master Jonas issued a dispensation authorizing a lodge at Nauvoo, and 5 months later, March 15, 1842, he paid an official visit to that place and set the lodge to work. In this connection, it may not be amiss to note the fact that the Grand Lodge of Illinois was barely 1 year old when the Nauvoo dispensation was granted, and that there were few, if any, over 100 members in the constituted lodges of the state. The natural desire for increase of numbers may have influenced the action of Grand Master Jonas in this instance, but there were other considerations. The fact should be remembered that he was a practical politician, having been trained in the Kentucky School of Politicians during the stormy political period from 1828 to 1833, when he was in the legislature of that state, and at this time he appeared to have been a candidate for a seat in the lower branch of the Illinois legislature, to which he was elected a few months after he had instituted Nauvoo lodging. These facts should be borne in mind too in connection with the highly laudatory letter concerning Nauvoo and its people, which he published in his paper immediately after his return from the official visitation, which covered 3 days and during which he was the personal guest of the Mormon prophet. From the very first, the movement to establish a Masonic lodge in Nauvoo appears to have been regarded with suspicion and distrust by Masons elsewhere in the state, more particularly by members of the Broadly Lodge No. 1 at Quincy. This attitude may have been due in part, at least, to the tales and rumors of misdoings which had followed the Mormons from Ohio and Missouri. But there were other factors. The history of the period now under review points unmistakably to certain political, religious, social, and personal forces and considerations which were not without a positive and a very great influence on the character and fortunes of the Mormon lodges, and which did much to shape Masonic opinion concerning those lodges and their membership. At the risk of seeming digression, space must be given here to consideration of some of these elements of the situation, for otherwise we shall find ourselves without either clue or background. Okay, that was chapter 1, so let's continue reading.
30. Anti-Masons were expanding their rhetoric to include accusations of other Masonic murders besides Morgan's. That year, social reformer Lebbeus Armstrong declared that many of the numerous murders which have polluted this and other lands with blood, which horrid deeds have been palmed on some innocent or unknown persons, have been really the bloody fruits of Masonic executions. It is awfully feared that when the light of eternity shall shine on the deeds of darkness, and every secret thing shall be brought into judgment, it will then be found that many of the sudden deaths in the world have been the result of Masonic vengeance, in the execution of penalty in the lodge room, or personal dispatch by poison or assassination, as the ghosts of the murdered Artemus Kennedy near Boston, the poisoned Simmons of Albany, and a host of others would doubtless testify now were they permitted to speak. The Book of Mormon also expresses the principle upon which anti-Masons believed Morgan's murder had been carried out, and whosoever of those who belonged to their band should reveal unto the world of their wickedness and their abominations should be tried, not according to the laws of their country, but according to the laws of their wickedness, which had been given them by Gadianton and Kishkumen. Later, as he worked on his inspired revision of the Bible in October 1830, Smith added passages in Genesis which had a more direct comparison to the Morgan affair, disclosing that Lamech murdered Irad, the son of Enoch, for the oath's sake, because Irad, having known their secret, began to reveal it unto the sons of Adam. So Bushman's argument from silence is incorrect, since the Book of Mormon and other early revelations of Joseph Smith do reflect Morgan's story. Bushman insists that in the supposed anti-Masonic passages in the Book of Mormon, nothing was said about Masonic degrees or elaborate initiation rituals. This argument from silence carries little weight, because the Book of Mormon itself repeatedly explains the omission. Moroni, for instance, states that he does not describe the oaths and combinations of the Jaredites, for it hath been made known unto me that they are had among all people, and they are had among the Lamanites. He then directly associates the Gadianton oaths with those practiced by latter-day secret combinations. It was unnecessary to repeat these secret oaths because readers were already familiar with them. Besides, a book purporting to be a history of Jewish immigrants with scant details of their elaborate rituals and customs can hardly be expected to record rituals that were considered satanic. The Book of Mormon does not give the details of the secret oaths, but it does provide general information that the first readers would have easily associated with Freemasonry. Mormon mentions the Gadianton bands, like Masons, had their signs, yea, their secret signs, and their secret words, and explains the purpose of such devices in language reminiscent of the anti-Masonic rhetoric. The Gadianton bands, he explains, adopted their secret signs and words that they might distinguish a brother who had entered into the covenant, that whatsoever wickedness his brother should do, he should not be injured by his brother, and explains that initiates promise that they would protect and preserve one another in whatsoever difficult circumstances they should be placed, and they should not suffer for their murders and their plunderings and their stealings. By the time the Book of Mormon appeared, anti-Masons had widely published the secret Masonic oaths and rituals, including its signs and passes or hand grips, and accompanying secret words or names. Masons who received the secret word for the second degree were told that it was used by our ancient brethren to distinguish a friend from foe. Anti-Masons charged that the oaths were designed to protect their guilty brethren from the lash of the civil laws, whether guilty or not guilty, treason and murder not excepted. And although they may be obliged to swear falsely to clear the guilty brother, they must do it, or incur the penalty of secret death. While the Book of Mormon is reticent about detailing the secret oaths, signs, and words, it nevertheless gives hints. Achish's Jaredite secret combination included a death oath requiring initiates to swear unto him by the God of heaven, and also by the heavens, and also by the earth, and by their heads, that whosoever should vary from the assistance which Achish desired should lose his head, and whoso should divulge whatsoever thing Achish made known unto them, the same should lose his life. In his own book, Mormon reports that many of the Nephites enter into Masonic-like oaths, swearing before the heavens and by the throne of God to avenge the blood of their fathers. Mormon states that they had sworn by all that had been forbidden them by our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. This alludes to Jesus' teachings both in Palestine and America. In the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:33 through 37 quotes Jesus as saying, "Again, ye have heard that it hath been said by them of old time, Thou shalt not forswear thyself, but shalt perform unto the Lord thine oaths. But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, neither by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Neither shalt thou swear by thy head, because thou canst not make one hair white or black. But let your communication be, yea, yea, nay, nay, for whatsoever is more than these cometh of evil." It was well known in Smith's day that Masonic degrees included penal signs and blood oaths, which described various ways life might be taken. The penalty for the first degree's entered apprentice, for instance, mentions having one's throat cut. Not until the higher degree of Knights Templar, as reported in the Wayne Sentinel on 14th of March 1828, do we find mention of having one's head struck off. Not surprisingly, anti-Masons quoted Jesus' words against oath-taking. In a speech delivered before the Brethren of St. John's Lodge in Middletown, Connecticut, on August 12, 1830, General Chauncey Whittlesey renounced his Masonic affiliation, declaring, among other things, that Masonry is an anti-Christian institution because Christ has said, "Swear not at all," but in the lodge, oath after oath of the most awful character is unnecessarily administered. One speaker at an anti-Masonic convention held in Philadelphia in 1830 said, "The first oath they take when they enter the lodge, they violate both the laws of religion and morality. Christ says, 'Swear not at all.' Every oath taken is in fact profane swearing because it is unauthorized." Bushman's complaint that the Book of Mormon lacks details in its description of ancient and modern secret combinations is weak.
Hello? What the fuck was that? What on earth was that? Okay. Okay, something went wrong. Hold on. Okay. Something went wrong, guys. I'm talking on the phone.
One speaker at an anti-Masonic convention held in Philadelphia in 1830 said, "The first oath they take when they enter the lodge, they violate both the laws of religion and morality. Christ says, 'Swear not at all.' Every oath taken is in fact profane swearing because it is unauthorized." So Bushman's complaint that the Book of Mormon lacks details in its description of ancient and modern secret combinations is weak and somewhat untrue. Osler states, "A frequent charge against Masonry, also absent from the Book of Mormon, was that it displaced Christianity by being a religion itself. Book of Mormon bands of robbers were not a quasi-religious fraternity." Osler's depiction of both anti-Masonic rhetoric and the Book of Mormon's Gadianton bands is both incomplete and misleading. It is true that anti-Masonic rhetoric initially focused on the fraternity's assumed threat to Christianity, but following the apparent murder of William Morgan in 1826, the concern shifted to the implied erosion of civil liberties and free government. By 1828, this had become a highly politicized topic, as anti-Masons organized to prevent the election of Andrew Jackson to the presidency. Religious concerns were not entirely displaced, but political and legal arguments dominated. One therefore should not expect to find the Gadianton robbers described as a religious organization. Instead, as expected, they are introduced during a hotly contested election, where they are involved in assassination plots until they are forced to flee into the wilderness, where they devolve into marauding robber bands. Contrary to Osler's portrayal, anti-Masons feared that Freemasonry could destroy rather than replace Christianity. In the introduction to Morgan's 1827 Illustrations of Masonry, publisher David C. Miller declared, "Masonry is to the modern world what the whore Babylon was to the ancient, and is the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, ready to tear out our bowels, and scatter them to the four winds of heaven. The Palmyra Freeman for 17th of November 1829 alleged that Masonry was a secret combination to destroy liberty and religion. On the 23rd of November 1828, the Republican Monitor of Cazenovia, New York, declared that Masonry was a dark, iniquitous, and corrupt combination against truth, equity, and the Church of Christ, and a deep and broad conspiracy against republicanism and Christianity. Within months following the Book of Mormon's publication, the Reverend Lebbeus Armstrong called Masonry a work of darkness, inspired by Satan to oppose, root out, destroy, and if possible, exterminate true religion from the world. Consistent with this view, the Book of Mormon portrays the Gadiantans as a threat to the true church. Mormon describes the purpose of the secret society, formed about 29 CE, to be that of protecting corrupt judges who were secretly executing the prophets. Alma concurs that secret combinations were responsible for murdering the prophets. Concerning the last days in particular, Nephi and Moroni warn of the corrupting effects of secret combinations on the church. Moroni speaks of the blood of God's saints, which shall be shed by them. Osler's description of the Gadiantans as a secular robber band is deficient, since there are also hints that their oaths included religious elements. Initiates entered into a covenant by swearing by their
Hello? Hello? Okay, we're back. Okay, let's do a little bit more reading. Let's do a little bit more reading, another chapter. These are short chapters. They're nice little short chapter packets. So I think like, I was just looking through them. The longest one looked like it was 6 pages. This one's 3 pages, so that shouldn't take us too long. This book it's not that long, so we should be able to get through this. Okay, chapter 2, political activities, appointments of John C. Bennett Master in Chancery, Joseph Smith's pronouncements with reference to candidate favors, Stephen A. Douglas extraneous influence. Hold on. Among the sinister forces of the time which reacted unfavorably, politics played no inconspicuous part. With the rapid increase of population at the Mormon capital came a realization on the part of the politicians of the state that the Mormon vote was a factor that must be reckoned with, and the concern of the leaders of the two political parties was in no way lessened when they discovered that for all practical purposes, the leaders of the church could turn the Mormon vote to the one party or the other as their plans or needs might dictate. If there lingered any doubt on this score in the minds of those who had reason for solitude, it must have disappeared when the prophet unequivocally declared that he and his people could support the men and party who were friendly to their interests. In consequence of this declaration, both Whigs and Democrats sought by obsequiousness and flattery and by ostentatious acts of service and promise of further assistance to secure this support. Nor were these religionists slow in taking advantage of this situation and using to the utmost the power thus unexpectedly placed in their hands. At the General Conference of the Church held early in October 1840, the decision was reached to petition the legislature for the incorporation of Navajo. In accordance with the plan, a committee, including Joseph Smith and Dr. Bennett, was selected to draft the necessary petition and bill. These documents Bennett carried up to Springfield in December of that year. He appeared to have been possessed of some ability as a lobbyist, and this, coupled with the persuasive dimension of the Mormon vote operating under the unit rule, accomplished wonder. When the matter finally came up, it met with no opposition. In the lower branch, only 1 or 2 dissenting votes were recorded against the measure, and in the Senate, none at all. Indeed, a recent writer declared that in the House, the bill was read by title only. Yet among the members of the Assembly, and at that time were such men of later national prominence as Lincoln, Trumbull, Bissell, Hardin, Logan, and others, and Stephen A. Douglas, then Secretary of State of Illinois and leader of the Democrat Party, used his influence to expedite the passage of the bill. This act granted charter to Nauvoo was signed by Governor Charlin December 16th, 1840. Abraham Lincoln, okay, never mind, 1840. Abraham Lincoln not only voted for this bill as indicated in the text, but congratulated Bennett upon his passage, and this is in spite of the fact that many of the saints erased his name and substituted that of his opponent at the last election. And University of the City of Nauvoo was of an extraordinary character. The only limitations placed on the power of the city council were no laws should be passed which was repugnant to the Constitution of the United States or to that of the state of Illinois. Among other unusual features of this marketable instrument was that which authorized the municipal court to issue writs of habeas corpus. This provision, as the sequel shows, was fraught with danger. It was so liable to abuse, and it was the misuse of such writs and brought the city and state authorities into conflict, fed the fires of hatred and opposition, and furnished a pretext for mob action. About the time that the Nauvoo Masons were taking the initial steps in the organization of the lodge, Judge Stephen A. Douglas, then one of the justices of the Supreme Court and located in Quincy, visited Nauvoo, addressed the people, was entertained by Joseph Smith, and while there appointed Dr. Bennett Master in Chancery. As noted above, Douglas had aided in securing the passage of the act of incorporating Nauvoo and thereby had won the gratitude of the saints. His action in the present instance greatly increased his popularity with Joseph Smith and his followers, but it subjected them to severe criticism and astonished members of both parties by its indiscretion. The editors of the Warsaw Signal would have us believe. The same writer paid his respect to the appointee with so much of vigor that his strictures drew from Joseph Smith a vitriolic communication in the course of which the prophet ordered the subscription of the signal cancelled. Thus, that Douglas did not fail to appreciate the political possibilities of the situation and to cultivate the goodwill of the people of Nauvoo is clearly apparent. On one occasion, for example, he adjourned court then in session in Quincy and went up to Nauvoo to witness and receive of Nauvoo Legion. In connection with the political campaign that Joseph Smith issued a political pronouncement referred to on previous pages, which removed all uncertainty concerning the position of the Mormon Church and their leaders with reference to the political issue and parties of the day. In this, the prophet declared that the saints did not care a fig for Whig or Democrat, that they all looked alike, and that he would support those who had shown themselves to be friends of Mormons. Then he added, Douglas is a master spirit, and his friends are our friend. We're willing to cast our banners on the air and fight for his side. In the gubernatorial election, which resulted in the choice of Thomas Ford for governor, the situation had become so tense that the opposing candidate, Joseph Duncan, felt constrained to make opposition to the political activities of the Mormons one of the chief planks in his platform. The election Ford was counted as a great Mormon victory. Enough has been said in the foregoing paragraphs to indicate somewhat of the methods employed by politicians of these days and the sacrifice they were willing to make for personal and party advantages. The effect to win the saints to the support of one political party or the other continued to be a factor in their affairs as long as they remain in Nauvoo, and it was this rivalry to secure their political adherents that made it possible for them to obtain in return such unusual favors and to wield the influence they did in political affairs. And it was this rivalry that made them alternately courted and hated by those who would use them. Another factor which at first blush might seem to be rather remote from the subject, but which nonetheless mitigated militated against the Masonry of Nauvoo, developed in the county to the south of what in which the city developed in the county to the south of that in which the city of the saint was located. Some city previous to the date, Sometime previous to the date upon which Grand Master Jonas issued his dispensation to the Nauvoo Brethren, a campaign was begun to secure the removal of the county seat from Quincy to Columbus. Quincy was the home of Bodley Lodge, while Grand Master Jonas lived in Columbus. Naturally, the Grand Master was in favor of the proposed change, while quite as naturally the prospect of losing the county seat did not commend itself to the people of Quincy and the membership of the Masonic Lodge there. A good deal of bitterness was engaged as a result, and feelings ran so high that when the Grand Master set communication to the Quincy papers in advocacy of the change, those reflectors of public feeling and opinions refused to print them. Not to be baffled in his purpose to carry on the fight, Grand Master Jonas and some of his friends went to St. Louis, purchased the necessary printing outfit, shipped it to Columbus, and began the publication of the Columbus Advocate, the very name of which indicates the purpose for which it was established. While this furnished the Grand Master with a medium through which he might express his view, it did not tend to mollify the feelings of the people of Quincy. One result was apparently that the members of the Bodley Lodge lost no opportunity to embrace this Grand Master, and the Lodge minutes and proceedings of Grand Lodge show how the situation reacted unfavorably to the Nauvoo lodges. Okay, let's keep watching.
Everlasting Maker. Mormon mentions that Gadianton did not obtain his secret oaths and covenants from the Jaredite records, but rather by revelation from Satan. One of the Gadianton leaders declares that their works are good and of ancient date, arguing that they seek only to recover their rights and government. Fellow apologist Daniel C. Peterson recognized that Osler's statement needed modification. The fact that the Book of Mormon authors elected to treat Gadiantonism as a secular robber gang does not necessarily make them such. A close reading of the text, even in its present tendentious state, demonstrates that Gadiantonism was an ideological movement and an alternative religious vision of considerable seductive power. In light of the shifting emphasis after the Morgan affair, one finds the Gadiantons described in the Book of Mormon as might be expected, that is, with prophets controverting Gadianton claims of religious, just, and good ideals, with a portrayal of them as a Satan-inspired cult designed to destroy true religion and subvert free government. Osler argues, nowhere in anti-Masonic rhetoric were Masons referred to as a distinct band of robbers. The Masons were never identified as a group which held out in the mountains and attacked as marauding robbers. The Nephites tried the robbers under martial law and assigned responsibility for dealing with them to the military. Americans looked to their civil sheriffs, and Masons stood trial in the usual criminal courts. Osler even asserts the Book of Mormon secret societies differ from Masons in the precise ways they are similar to ancient Near Eastern bands of robbers. Osler could have just as easily said the Book of Mormon secret societies differ from ancient Near Eastern bands of robbers in the precise ways they are similar to Masons. True, Masonry in 1829 was not considered a marauding robber band, but both anti-Masons and the Book of Mormon were warning Jacksonian America about potential dangers and future events. The Gadianton bands did not originate in the Outback, but emerged about 52 BCE among the Nephites during a hotly contested election as a secret society intent on infiltrating Nephite government by assassination, and only later were they driven into the wilderness and took on the characteristics that Osler emphasizes. Nothing prohibited Joseph Smith from blending elements from various places as he imagined the decline and fall of the Nephite nation. For example, he may have been aware of the Sicarii, a band of robbers who operated in Palestine before the Roman destruction of Jerusalem about 70 CE. mentioned by Josephus, the first century Jewish historian. In his Antiquities of the Jews, Josephus writes that the country was again filled with robbers and impostors who deluded the multitude. These robbers, like the Gadiantans, lived in the caves and mountains near the city. Josephus reports that the robbers stirred up the people to make war with the Romans and said they ought not to obey them at all. And when any persons would not comply with them, they set fire to their villages and plundered them. And then it was that the Sicarii, as they were called, who were robbers, grew numerous. The Latin designation Sicarii refers to the daggers they concealed under their garments, which they used to assassinate Jewish merchants and officials who collaborated with the Romans. With these daggers, Josephus informs, they slew a great many, for they mingled themselves among the multitude at their festivals, and easily slew those they had a mind to slay. Ironically, the Sicarii were hired by Felix, the Roman official in charge of Judea, to assassinate Jonathan the high priest, which they carried out by mingling with the crowd in the temple and then striking suddenly. Similar to Moroni, Josephus believed these secret murderers and robbers were responsible for the destruction of Jerusalem. It seems to me, he wrote, to have been the reason why God, out of his hatred of these men's wickedness, rejected our city. And as for the temple, he no longer esteemed it sufficiently pure for him to inhabit therein, but brought the Romans upon us, and threw a fire upon the city to purge it. Brigham Young University assistant professor of ancient scripture, Lincoln H. Blumel, doesn't deny that the respective purposes of the robbers in Josephus and the Book of Mormon are quite similar, and their modus operandi share a number of parallels, but insists that this does not automatically suggest Joseph Smith's direct reliance on Josephus. Still, the similarity is striking, and nothing prevented Smith from blending it with anti-Masonic rhetoric about the Jacksonians. However, despite Osler's assertion about Masonry, the wilderness condition of Masonry was not a foreign idea. According to Masonic lore, before lodges were erected, ancient Masons met on the highest hills and the lowest vales because it was better to guard against cowens, or intruders, and enemies, either ascending or descending, that the brethren might have timely notice of their approach to prevent being surprised. Some lodges were themselves referred to as encampments. Thus, the Reverend Peter Sanborn worried in 1829 that Masonry was an encampment entrenched on a high and inaccessible mountain, ready to rush down upon our country like an irresistible tornado. Whether in legend or metaphor, the wilderness imagery was there to expand upon. In view of the 1828 rhetoric about Andrew Jackson's early involvement with the Aaron Burr conspiracy in the Western Territories in 1805 and 1806, which anti-Masons believed included a Masonic cover-up, the idea that plots to overthrow the government would come from the wilderness was not unrealistic. It remains unclear what Burr's full intentions were as he plotted his Western coup, but he gained lasting notoriety as a traitor, and Jackson's involvement, though perhaps innocent, hurt him in the 1828 campaign. Concerning the Burr conspiracy, anti-Masonic writer Henry Dana Ward declared, "The injury done to our national character by Burr's conspiracy was of the highest magnitude. The private correspondence of that conspiracy was carried on in the Royal Arch cipher, which is a proof that the agents were exalted Freemasons. This accounts also for their escaping the vengeance of the law. The evidence of their guilt was chiefly in the mystic characters of Freemasonry and the Royal Arch breasts, and thus closed against the search of human tribunals by the profane oath and impious penalty of a Royal Arch Mason's obligations." Osler is also incorrect about Masons not being classed with robbers. The Wayne Sentinel for the 26th of September 1828 reprinted an article alleging that Masonry's real object is anarchy and plunder. Anti-Masons criticized the fraternity's attempt to gain unfair economic advantage over the uninitiated, and frequently quoted Volney's statement that every association which has mystery for its basis or an oath of secrecy is a league of robbers against society. Joseph Smith may have transformed Volney's metaphor into a dramatic portrayal, or simply assumed that Masons forced into encampments would degenerate into robber bands for survival. Osler added very little to Bushman's arguments.
Live streaming can be tricky, and sometimes trying to find the right software to make your
Later, the same year, Mormon historian D. Michael Quinn published his book, Mormonism and the Magic World View, that detailed Joseph Smith's involvement in treasure seeking and the occult. Pushing his thesis a bit too far, Quinn argued that the Book of Mormon's prediction of Latter-day secret combinations and secret murders really refers to witchcraft and occult murders, but offered little evidence in support of his occult thesis. Nevertheless, he attempted to overturn the anti-Masonic interpretation of the Book of Mormon's first readers, building on Bushman's previous arguments from silence and making irrelevant distinctions. Quinn argues that the vast majority of anti-Masons had always seen Freemasonry as a strictly modern development, whereas the Book of Mormon claims that the secret combinations originated with Satan and Cain. Masons trace their origin to Solomon's temple, and some believe the principles of Freemasonry went back to Noah and even the Garden of Eden. In
Hello? 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 Did everyone hear that? Going back to Noah? Yeah, going back to Noah or even the Garden of Eden, the secrets of Masonry. Yeah, I have to play it again. There's the Noahite Freemasonry. There's a video called The Disappearance of Noahite Freemasonry. And the claim of that video is, which I will play one time, is that the original founding myth of Freemasonry is in Noah and not in Hiram Abiff. So Hiram Abiff is supposedly the founder of Freemasonry, but in older legends, it's Noah. Noah was the founder of Freemasonry, and I have a lot of that up on my website, stopnoahidelaw.blogspot.com. Okay. Okay, so we're on chapter 3. I'm going to read about 3 pages, then we'll go back, then I'll read another 3 pages. Okay, let's go. Chapter 3, beginning of the practice of polygamy, Brigham Young's statement to Scheuer, Colfax, knowledge and practice of the principle extended, denials and explanations of the same, Bennett's disaffection. But while the machinations of self-seeking sycophantic politicians and the venom of ill-feeling engendered and the venom and ill feelings engendered in an extraneous squabble over the location of a county seat, where each influence in the affair of Nauvoo and its masonry, were each influential in the affairs of Nauvoo and its masonry, neither was as baleful in its effects or as portentous of evil for all concerned as were certain events which, even though they were taking place within the community itself. Exactly 1 month before the visit of Judge Douglas to Nauvoo, when he appointed John C. Bennett master in Chancery, that is, April 5th, 1841, Joseph Smith took his first plural wife. Although this, so far as available records show, was the first instance of the practice of polygamy, or the great and glorious principle of plural marriage, the doctrine had been taught by Smith, or strongly hinted at to certain of his followers, fully 10 years earlier than this. It was first pressed upon his mind in 1831 and immediately made known to a few of his close personal friends, who in turn passed it on to others. But in beginning with the prophet's marriage to Louisa Beeman in April 1841, as noted above, the evidence is conclusive that plural marriage was abundantly practiced in Nauvoo during the 2 year immediately preceding the date at which the revelation was committed to writing, July 12, 1843. At first, when this revelation was given permanent form, as it appears in Doctrine and Covenant, the prophet had no less than 12 plural wives, and other leaders of the church had followed him quite extensively in this practice. However, it was not officially proclaimed as a doctrine of the church until some years subsequent to the settlement of the saints in Utah. The fact is worthy of noting that on one occasion at least, Brigham Young gave the impression that he was responsible for the revelation of plural marriage. He may not have been careful in the choice of his words, but certainly his language seems to convey that meaning. Although, as stated elsewhere in these passages, Joseph Smith began teaching this principle actively within a year after settling at Nauvoo, he proceeded with the utmost caution. At first, he confided it only to those in whom he had absolute confidence, and not to them until after he had exacted from them the most solemn assurance that they would keep the secret inviolable, for it was not yet lawful to proclaim it within hearing of the multitude. And secrecy was enjoined for the further reasons that not only would this doctrine run counter to the traditions and prejudices of many of the saints, but its proclamation would place a powerful weapon in the hands of their enemies. However, the prophet did not venture to test the feelings of the people concerning this doctrine. Sometime prior to the return of the apostle from Europe, namely before July 1st, 1841, on the occasion named, he preached a sermon on the restoration of all things, in which he strongly hinted that the patriarchal or plural order of marriage, as practiced by the ancients, would again be established. We learn that this statement created great excitement and consternation among those who heard the discourse delivered at a morning service, so much so, in fact, that the prophet deemed it wisdom in the afternoon to modify his statement by saying that possibly the Spirit had made the time seem nearer than it really was, when such things would be restored. But though the prophet taught this doctrine in secret, and so far as possible guarded against a general knowledge of the same, he did not hesitate to bring pressure to bear to secure covenants to his practice among those who were high in church and esteem and authority. 3 times he ordered his staunch friends and comrade Heber C. Kimball to go and take a certain woman as his wife, plural, and finally, Heber was told by Joseph that if he did not do this, he would lose his apostleship and be damned, so forcing people to take plural wives. From the evidence in hand, the fact appears to be that although at this time, that is, during the first half of the year in 1841, a knowledge of an acceptance of the doctrine of plurality of wives were confirmed to the leaders and principal men in the church, and that not all of them had been enlightened in the respect. Within 2 years, information on the subject had been quite generally disseminated among the people. To believe that such a revolutionary practice could be taught and indulged in for any considerable length of time, and restrict a knowledge of that fact to those of whom it was intended, would place too great a tax upon our credulity, and would flatly contradict the teachings of experience concerning human nature. Besides the presence of apostles in the community and in adjoining settlements, some of whom had stood high in the council of the church, would preclude the possibility of maintaining secrecy. Gradually, knowledge of what was going on in respect to plurality of wives percolated through the community, and was taken up and given triumphant voice by the enemies of the church. The enforced secrecy which a reckonable prudence demands with reference to the promulgation and practice of the doctrine of plural marriage bore fruit in another perplexing and troublesome situation for the prophet and his followers, for it gave color to the charge of bad faith and double dealing. The fact that the leaders of the church and other prominent prominence in affairs where practicing polygamy was a matter of common belief, if not of general knowledge. Yet those same leaders did not hesitate to deny directly and by implication that such was the case, and to do this in such terms as to leave no room for any other construction. This conflict between the public utterances and the practices of Joseph Smith and others was used with telling effect by those who, for one reason or another, had entered the list against the Mormons. A present day historian and member of the church, when considering the particular facts under review, regretfully admitted that wicked men took advantage of the situation and brought sorrow to the hearts of the innocent and reproach upon the church. An incident that occurred a few months before the prophet's death illustrates the length to which the church would go in the matter of denials of this doctrine as having any place in the faith or practice of the Latter-day Saints, and may not unfairly be characterized as involving duplicity. It appears that an elder of the church who had been taught this principle was sent up into Lapper County, Michigan, as a missionary. Whatever may have been the character of the instructions he was given with reference to teaching this principle, his zeal outran his discretion. His preaching of the new evangel created such a stir in that region that the prophet was constrained to take official notice of the situation. This he did by publishing the following notice in the church paper. As we have lately been credibly informed that an elder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints by the name of Hiram Brown has been preaching polygamy and other false and corrupt doctrines in the county of Lapeer, state of Michigan. This is to notify him and the church in general that he has been cut off from the church for his iniquity, and he is further noticed to appear in the special conference on the 6th of April next to answer for these charges. Okay. Ooh, these Mormons seem slippery, don't they?
1823 English cleric and prolific Masonic author George Oliver, for instance, described Adam and other patriarchs as grand masters and Eve as the mother of all Masons. Contrary to Quinn's assertion, anti-Masons tended to favor one of two rhetorical responses to this claim. The majority certainly argued that Masonry had a strictly modern origin, as Quinn observed. Others, however, argued that the secret society originated with Cain, the first murderer. Thus, Peter Sanborn, explaining Masonry's real origin, argued that the truth may be that the first Grand Archmason was Satan, the first secret lodge in Eden. Between him and Eve, Cain, like Nimrod, rebelled against the priesthood and government of Adam. He, with Tubal Cain, no doubt, were Masons. Quinn is right that the second path stemmed more from necessity than from sincere belief in the antiquity of Masonry, but in making this observation, he is perhaps too dismissive, for such subtlety may have escaped Joseph Smith. If anti-Masonic writers separated fact from rhetoric, it does not necessarily follow that their audiences did. Regardless, the possibility that Smith adopted an anachronistic approach with regard to Masonry should not come as a surprise, since his treatment of Christianity in the Book of Mormon is also anachronistic. Smith's association of Masonry with Cain was made even clearer in his inspired revision of Genesis. Sometime between June and October 1830, only months after the Book of Mormon came off the press, Smith dictated an anti-Masonic interpretation of Cain's murder of Abel, revealing that Cain had secretly covenanted with Satan to murder Abel for gain. He then added an unmistakably anti-Masonic passage to Genesis. And Cain said, "Truly, I am Mahan, the master of this great secret, that I may murder and get gain." Wherefore Cain was called Master Mahan, and he gloried in his wickedness. There can be little doubt that Smith intended Master Mahan as a play on Master Mason, the name given to third-degree Masons. For these reasons, Quinn's objection that the Book of Mormon isn't anti-Masonic because it assigns an ancient origin for secret combinations can therefore be dismissed. Quinn asserts Whereas anti-Masons typically claimed that Masonry was a fraternal organization dedicated to overthrowing Christianity and monarchy, the Book of Mormon repeatedly claimed that the main purpose was to murder and plunder, and that the subversion of governments was necessary only for gaining the power to protect these murders and plunders. Ultimately, this distinction amounts to nothing, even if true. Quinn wants to diminish the political context of secret combinations because it doesn't fit his attempt to interpret them as witch covens and occult murders. Nevertheless, Quinn was wrong. According to the Book of Mormon, the goals of the secret combinations were to get power and gain, that is, political power and economic gain, and resort to murder and robbery as the quickest means of obtaining them. Political power certainly had the added benefit of protecting the perpetrators of murder and robbery, but the first murders were political assassinations. The first secret society among the Nephites was formed about 52 BCE to protect Kishkumen, who had assassinated Paharan, the chief judge. Later, Gadianton became the leader of Kishkumen's band and sought to become chief judge himself. He promised his co-conspirators that if they would place him in the judgment seat, he would grant that they should be placed in power and authority among the people. To place Gadianton in power, Kishkumen tried to assassinate Helaman, who had replaced Paharan as chief judge. However, Kishkumen's plot was discovered by one of Nephi's servants and killed. Prior to his death, Kishkumen revealed to one of Helaman's servants that it was the object of all those who belonged to his band to murder and to rob and to gain power. Thus, Gadianton's band was formed to advance political intrigue. This is the opposite of what Quinn asserts, for rather than seeking civil office for protection, Gadianton and his band derived protection from the oaths obligating them to secrecy, while they plotted to get political power. Political objectives were therefore integral, not peripheral, to Gadiantonism. A subsequent Gadianton group, organized about 16 CE, proclaimed its intention to overthrow the Nephite government by force if necessary. Gadianhai, the governor of the Gadiantons, writes an epistle to Laconius, leader of the Nephites, asking him to surrender the reins of government or be destroyed. In his letter, Gadianhai imparts some Gadianton political philosophy. I hope that ye will deliver up your lands and your possessions without the shedding of blood, that this people may recover their rights and government. This hardly sounds as though Gadianton political objectives were of incidental interest. The secret society, organized about 29 CE to protect corrupt judges, similarly challenges Quinn's assertion that Gadiantons infiltrated government for protection. In this instance, the secret society protected public officials, not the reverse. This same society conspired to establish one of its members, Jacob, as king, demonstrating again that political power was a major objective. The secret society among the Jaredites also had a similar political origin. In this case, Jared and Achish conspired to assassinate King Omer. Moroni describes the oaths administered by Achish, which had existed since the days of Cain, and were designed to help such as sought power to gain power, and to murder and to plunder and to lie, and to commit all manner of wickedness and whoredoms. Thus, Jared's conspiracy, like that of Gadianton's, sought political rule as a major objective. This brief overview shows the Book of Mormon to be in line with what Quinn acknowledged for anti-Masonic rhetoric. That is, that Masonry was dedicated to the overthrow of Christianity and monarchy, or more accurately in America, the overthrow of the Republican government. As one anti-Mason declared in 1829, Masonry is directly calculated to overturn every religion and every civil government on earth. According to Masons, New York Governor DeWitt Clinton had admitted as early as 1825 that Masonry was dangerous because it has conspired against all governments. The Wayne Sentinel for 18th of July 1828 reported that anti-Masons objected to the institution because it affords opportunities for the corrupt and designing to form plans against the government. And the New England Anti-Masonic Almanac for 1831 recognize that Masonry is peculiarly adapted to political intrigue. One should not push too hard for exact parallels, as I have previously argued, since the Gadiantans are only intended to be analogous to Jacksonian America as a warning of political dangers. So one should not expect to find Masons accused of assassinating public officials or forming military coups in the wilderness. Instead, one should view such elements as a reflection of Joseph Smith's imagination, his attempt to create for his readers frightening images of what Masonry could become. Bushman disagrees with Quinn and suggests that the Gadianton bands could, with equal ease, be perceived as modern terrorist guerrillas, dissenters at war with the old order, penetrating villages on the margins of official control, undermining from within, and attacking openly when they had strength. Viewed in context, the Masonic-like oaths and covenants were secondary to direct attacks on government through assassinations and military raids. Despite Bushman's apologetic, it's not a matter of which element is primary or secondary, which is irrelevant and meaningless. But, of course, Bushman wants to minimize the secret oaths so that the Book of Mormon can better fit his generic description. To first readers, the secret signs, words, and oaths were integral to the Book of Mormon's description. Indeed, the oaths and covenants were central to the Gadianton plan of infiltration, as well as to their cohesion and identity. Alma considered the oaths and covenants crucial enough to command his son to retain them from the people, lest peradventure they should fall into darkness and also be destroyed. And the oaths were the means of bringing down the people unto destruction. Thus, one cannot with equal ease apply the Book of Mormon's description of the Gadianton bands to modern terrorist guerrillas. In the
See, can you hear me? Hold on one second. Hello? 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 No, you can't hear me. Hello? 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 There we go. There we go. Hi, guys. Okay, we have another 2 pages to read in this chapter, and that's going to be the last of the reading for today because I'm getting tired. And I do have a lot of, so by doing these readings and watching these videos, I've been neglecting other work. So I have the time, I have to get other work done. I mean, other work on like, you know, my websites and everything like that. And my Noah Hyde website and everything. It's just like I constantly have so much work to do. But okay, let's finish this chapter and then we'll finish this video. When that notice appeared in the Times of Seasons, both of the men whose names were attached to it were teaching and practicing polygamy, and Joseph Smith was the husband of not less than 20 wives. In effect, that would seem to be a fairly plain denial of polygamy as having any part or place in the church system of precepts or practices. Other examples of denials quite as pointed as the one given, if anything, even more emphatic, are to be found in the literature of the church some years after the prophet's death. In appearance, however, that such statements and even the paragraphs in the Doctrine of Covenants which deals with monogamy are not to be considered as denials of the principles by church leaders, but rather as an evasion to satisfy popular clamor. Undoubtedly, the disaffection of Dr. John C. Bennett, which occurred early in May 1842, did more to focus attention upon the practice of polygamy by Joseph Smith and others in Nauvoo than any other event. The estimate one shall place on the character of this man, or how he shall be regarded in the light of the strangely contradictory testimony concerning him, is not material to the purpose in view. He appears to have been a very devil incarnate, or a gentleman and a scholar, according to the point of view or end to be served. This much appeared to be beyond dispute. He told the truth and not wicked lies about Joseph when he asserted that the prophet taught doctrines in secret that he dared not make public. that he practiced polygamy and taught the principles in private and denounced it publicly, that one of his plural wives was Louisa Beeman, and that he assured his own followers that it is your privilege to have all the wives you want. The fact is equally beyond dispute that Bennett was in a position greatly to injure Joseph Smith, and no less certain that he used that power to the utmost. Indeed, the statement has been made by a recent writer that Bennett, more than any other person or influence, was responsible for the downfall of the Mormon power in church in Illinois. One needs but to be reminded of the important part Bennett had played in church and community life to appreciate the character and extent of the peculiar power he had in his hands, and to understand why the prophet hastened to use such means as were available to discredit him. Before the world, in advance of the final rupture, for nearly or quite a year and a half, Bennett had been in a position to know the inner council of the leaders of the church, for he was himself one of those leaders. When he became a member of the church, he was quartermaster general of the state of Illinois. He helped to draft the famous charters and the bill of the incorporation of Nauvoo, and himself carried them up to Springfield and successfully urged the passage of the act. He had served as the first mayor of Nauvoo under the new charter. He was second in command in the Nauvoo Legion. He had been appointed master in chancery by Judge Stephen A. Douglas, and for a time he occupied Sidney Rigdon's palace as a matter of the first presidency of the church, and with all the rest, he appeared to have practiced his profession, that of physician, by the name of these various points of contact. He would know, could not help knowing what was going on in the church and community. That Joseph Smith did not underestimate Bennett's power to do harm is apparent in the unusual steps taken to counteract his influence. Through lodge, church, legion, and city council, in all of which he had played a prominent part the prophet moved to humiliate, discredit, and overwhelm him. Finding these means insufficient to accomplish the ends sought, he called a special conference of the church, which assembled in Nauvoo early in August of that year, for the purpose of calling a number of elders to go out in different directions, and by their preaching deluge the states with a flood of truth, to allay the excitement which had been raised by the falsehood put in circulation by John C. Bennett. Nearly 400 men volunteered to do this work. This is pretty gross that they're lying this much. On this part, Bennett left no stone unturned that promised to be of service in his struggle with the prophet. He used a voice and pen so persistently and effectively that Joseph Smith decided it to be part of wisdom to give into seclusion for a time, to avoid officers from Missouri whose attentions had been turned toward Nauvoo by Bennett's representation. For almost a month immediately preceding this special conference referred to above, no one outside his family and a few of his close friends had any information as to his whereabouts. A passage in his journal gives an animate account of his effect of this unexpected appearance at the conference. Okay. Okay, well, yeah, that lying sounds gross. I don't like that. But let's finish.
Context of the 1828 election, Jackson and his followers were the dissenters at war with the old order. It was a period of extreme tension and represented a major shift in the balance of power in the United States. Not surprisingly, many predicted doom upon the young nation and feared that the situation would degenerate into civil war. Given Masonry's own militaristic imagery, its reference to encampments and knights, together with its apparent union with the liberal Democrats headed by the famous General Jackson, whose brutality was a feature of the opposition's campaign rhetoric, Joseph Smith would not have to stretch his imagination too far to come up with the militant Gadianton bands. Peterson finds that one of the major difficulties with the anti-Masonic interpretation is that one must see Joseph Smith as a vocal and committed anti-Mason in 1830, who then, only 12 years later, enthusiastically joined the Masons and, as some would have it, borrowed the most sacred rituals of his religion from them. Where, then, is the evidence of his alleged conversion from anti-Masonry in the late 1820s during the translation of the Book of Mormon to pro-Masonry in the 1840s when he was revealing the ordinances of the temple. The situation in America had dramatically changed by the time Joseph Smith became a Freemason on the 15th of March, 1842. But his so-called conversion to Masonry was not complete, for soon after joining, he devalued the system by claiming it was a corrupt version of his temple endowment. On the 17th of June, 1842, Heber C. Kimball wrote fellow apostle Parley P. Pratt in England, "There is a similarity of priesthood in Masonry. Brother Joseph Smith says Masonry was taken from priesthood." Later, Benjamin F. Johnson reported that Joseph Smith told me Freemasonry, as at present, was the apostate endowments, as sectarian religion was the apostate religion. Thus, Peterson's use of conversion with regard to Masonry is misleading. Regardless, Smith's embrace of Masonry, even if it were complete, cannot be used to argue that he wasn't anti-Masonic more than a decade earlier. Historians recognize this as a species of the idealist fallacy, which is the assumption that humans always act consistently and rationally. As historian David Hackett Fisher observes, a presumption of logical consistency is as unjustified as a presumption of the opposite. If Smith reversed himself on Masonry, it was not the only instance. Smith subsequently changed his mind on the nature of the Godhead and the duration of hell and punishment, for example, which were Book of Mormon doctrines. No matter what interpretation one holds of the Book of Mormon and Masonry, one must acknowledge that Joseph Smith opposed Masonry in principle, if not in fact, before he joined the order. In 1839, Smith spoke against the impropriety of bands or companies being organized by covenant or oaths, by penalties or secrecies. Pure friendship always becomes weakened the very moment you undertake to make it stronger by penal oaths and secrecy. Smith's later change of attitude did not go unnoticed. Decades later, Ebenezer Robinson, who was the editor of the Times and Seasons and a member of the Nauvoo Masonic Lodge, said, "Heretofore, the Church had strenuously opposed secret societies such as Freemasons and Knights of Pythias, not considering the Order of Enoch and Danites of that class. But after Dr. John C. Bennett came into the Church, a great change of sentiment seemed to take place. James C. Brewster, who became the leader of a dissident Mormon group, saw the endowment as a contradiction of earlier teachings. In 1849, Brewster declared that the Church had fallen by imperceptible degrees until 1842, when the final step was taken by the introduction of a secret order, in direct violation of almost every command in the gospel of Christ. The priesthood does not consist in high-sounding titles, in secret combinations, in key words and mysteries," he wrote. All interpreters, not just those proposing an anti-Masonic interpretation of the Book of Mormon, must deal with Joseph Smith's inconsistency. Peterson argues that secret combinations is a generic term for any secret society, and disputes my 1989 contention that at the time of the Book of Mormon's publication, the term secret combinations was used almost exclusively to refer to Freemasonry. Consequently, Peterson and his fellow apologists think that it's a simple matter of searching for exceptions, no matter how far removed from the time and place of the Book of Mormon's publication. My 1989 statement was based on extensive reading in the primary documents, but with the advent of Google, about 24 non-Masonic uses of the phrase secret combinations have been located. However, my intention was to show that in the context of the 1828 U.S. presidential campaign, in which Andrew Jackson's opponents exploited his Masonic affiliation, the phrase had become politically charged, not that anti-Masons had invented the phrase. In such an environment, the term had become laden with anti-Masonic connotation, and hence it informed first readers in their unanimous interpretation of the Book of Mormon as anti-Masonic. The term secret combinations had special significance to anti-Masons, especially in Western New York, where William Morgan had been abducted and presumably murdered by the Masons in 1826. To many people, it seemed that the perpetrators were being protected by fellow Masons who had infiltrated the government. Only 6 weeks after Morgan's disappearance, the citizens of Leroy resolved to withhold votes from any candidate for public office who has in any way aided, assisted, or approved of those late outrages, and does not publicly condemn them. After wondering, is it the result of accident that the Masons hold all the offices, govern the presses, and control the administration of justice? The Batavia Advocate concluded, we must resort to the polls of election. The following February, the Anti-Masonic Party was formed, and soon they were holding local meetings and state and national conventions, during which resolutions were drafted. The party's main aim was to prevent the election of Masonic candidates, especially Andrew Jackson in 1828 and 1832, and to support anti-Masonic candidates, most notably William Wirt, in his unsuccessful presidential campaign of 1832. Hence, examples of non-Masonic uses of the phrase, before it had become a feature of anti-Masonic rhetoric, do not necessarily detract from my initial observation, as also those that are drawn from a time when anti-Masonry had lost its political usefulness, and many anti-Masons joined the Whig Party in the late 1830s. The most thorough apologetic attempt to discredit the idea that there was a semantic narrowing of the term secret combinations following William Morgan's disappearance in 1826 and during the 1828 campaign is Gregory L. Smith's 2015 Interpreter article, Cracking the Book of Mormon's Secret Combinations. While Mr. Smith included an index with 18 additional examples of the non-Masonic use of the phrase secret combinations between 1833 and 1850, his essay focused on 13 examples between 1782 and 1832, evidently believing them to be the most relevant. Among other things, Mr. Smith argued that anti-Masons did not limit the term secret combinations to Masonry, but expanded it to include other secret combinations. But in doing so, he confused hypothetical groups with actual groups. Mr. Smith quotes Solomon Southwick's demand that those seeking political office should swear to and subscribe a declaration, in addition to the oath or oaths now in use, that he was not then a member and would not thereafter become one of any secret self-created combination whatsoever. Apologist Smith argues that this shows that Southwick clearly believes that a wide variety of secret self-created combinations are present and future risks, and that it is implicit evidence that the phrase secret combination was already broadly understood by his audience to apply to any number of nefarious organizations or practices. Naturally, anti-Masons were opposed in principle to anything like Masonry, but this was merely hypothetical and reflected Washington's warning to beware of combinations and associations under whatever plausible character. The hypothetical nature of Southwick's statement is made clear when he subsequently quotes an editorial that refers to Washington's farewell warning, and then asks, what secret combination existed in our country at that time, except Masonry? So, according to anti-Masons, Washington specifically referred to Freemasons, but also hypothetically to any similar group that may appear in the future. This is the very definition of semantic narrowing, and explains why first readers of the Book of Mormon readily interpreted its discussion of secret combinations with Freemasonry. The resolutions of various anti-Masonic conventions adopted Washington's language outright, while others paraphrased it. Thus, the Anti-Masonic Convention in Connecticut in 1830 approved a resolution against all secret combinations of men under whatsoever plausible character, while another convention in Philadelphia appointed a committee for the sole purpose of diffusing information extensively on the subject of Freemasonry and other secret combinations against the equal rights of mankind and our free institutions. Political anti-Masons took a stand against all secret societies as incompatible with free institutions, but they also viewed Masonry as polymorphic or diverse in nature, with various independent lodges and orders, such as the York and Scottish Rites. Indeed, they regarded Masonry as an international plot to overturn all free governments, which most notably included the Bavarian German Illuminati, considered by anti-Masons to be a branch of Masonry that was responsible for the French Revolution. While Mr. Smith quotes anti-Masons referring to other secret combinations, he provides no examples of where anti-Masons actually name these other organizations. The closest he comes is when he quotes one 1830 anti-Masonic source that states that the Jesuits were a secret combination of men and compares them to the Masons. Some anti-Masons speculated that Freemasonry was the invention of English Jesuits. This quote occurs in the 1830 source that Mr. Smith used to make his argument. So when anti-Masons referred to 17th century Jesuits as a secret combination, they were not using it in a non-Masonic context. Of the 13 examples of the non-Masonic use of secret combinations between 1782 and 1832 gathered by Mr. Smith, 6 were before the Morgan affair. 3 of the remaining 7, like the Jesuits previously discussed, are actually Masonic. He therefore overstates his case when he concludes that such evidence demonstrates that Joseph Smith chose the term secret combinations because it was a general term in the United States for any clandestine group or plot, especially one in the political realm. On the contrary, Joseph Smith no doubt chose the term because he was well aware that to anti-Masons, Masonry was not just a secret combination. It was the secret combination, seeking to overthrow all free governments, just as the Book of Mormon predicted of latter-day secret combinations. In 1838, Methodist minister Leroy Sunderland pointed to the Book of Mormon's terminology as a link to anti-Masonry. This book purports to have been found in 1827, just after the time when there was so much said throughout this nation about Freemasonry. Hence, the reader will find frequent allusions in it to Freemasonry, under the names of secret societies, dreadful oaths, and secret combinations. Interestingly, in a detailed response to Sunderland's criticisms of Mormonism and the Book of Mormon, later the same year, Parley P. Pratt skipped the issue of anti-Masonry entirely. The term secret combinations was in fact defined by anti-Masons themselves. Perhaps the best example comes from the Morgan Investigator, a periodical published near the Smith farm at Batavia, New York, which declared in its 29th of March 1827 issue, "Beware of secret combinations. These are the dying words of General George Washington. Do not these words point with an index that cannot be mistaken to the Society of Freemasons?" The same year, Solomon Southwick, editor of the National Observer at Albany, New York, published a solemn warning against Freemasonry, in which he repeated the statement from another newspaper, which bears repeating with further comment. When we hear him, Washington, uttering a farewell warning to his countrymen to beware of secret combinations, what are we to suppose he means? What secret combination existed in our country at that time except Masonry? However, Washington had only warned of combinations and associations, not secret combinations. Anti-Masons had thus added secret to Washington's words to make it appear that he agreed with them. This led Masons to charge Southwick and other anti-Masons with perpetrating a base forgery for political purposes. In 1829, Masons retorted, "It is one of the most ridiculous and contemptible forgeries and impositions ever attempted to be palmed upon the public." Nevertheless, tampering with Washington's words to make it appear he had warned against Freemasonry shows that the term secret combination was firmly embedded in their anti-Masonic arsenal. Clearly, when I wrote that the term secret combinations was used almost exclusively to refer to Freemasonry, I meant that the anti-Masonic definition of the term was the dominant one when the Book of Mormon appeared. I think that is what we find in the historical record. Ultimately, whether or not the term secret combinations was used almost exclusively by anti-Masons is less important than it was their favorite term, one that they inaccurately tied to none other than Washington. Joseph Smith had used the right term to help his readers make the right identification without using the name. Peterson rejects the connection I made between the Masons and a number of Joseph Smith's revelations that mention the reason for moving to Ohio and ultimately to Missouri was to escape secret combinations. Instead, Peterson suggests that the secret combinations were simply persecutors, the mobs with whom Mormons would become so wearily well acquainted. In historical context, it is clear that Smith's revelations describe something more powerful and pervasive than Mormon persecutors, something which functions independently of the Mormons. What is more, contrary to Peterson's assertion that there is no reason to suppose that the secret combinations alluded to in the Doctrine and Covenants have any connection at all with Freemasonry. There are, in fact, several good reasons for this. On the 9th of February, 1831, shortly after Smith arrived in Ohio, he dictated a revelation announcing that Mormons were to gather to the New Jerusalem in Missouri. Let him that goeth to the east teach them that shall be converted to flee to the west, and this in consequence of that which is coming on earth, and of secret combinations. This statement continues a theme of an earlier revelation, dictated in New York prior to leaving, which explained that which is coming on earth is a desolating war. Behold, the enemy is combined, and now I show unto you a mystery, a thing which is had in secret chambers, to bring to pass even your destruction in process of time, and ye knew it not. And again I say unto you, that the enemy in the secret chamber seeketh your lives. Ye hear of wars in far countries, and you say that there will soon be great wars in far countries. But ye know not the hearts of men in your own land. Wherefore, for this cause, I gave unto you the commandment, that ye should go to the Ohio. Believers are warned to flee those who plan their destruction in secret chambers, a term sometimes applied to Masonic lodges. Significantly, there is a close association of secret combinations with the coming war, which makes Peterson's interpretation of Mormon persecutors too narrow. Despite Peterson's apologetic, Joseph Smith nevertheless named the Masons as persecutors. Following his departure to Ohio, Joseph Smith feared that family members remaining in New York were in danger from Morgan-like plots. Evidence of this is provided in a letter Joseph Smith wrote from Kirtland, Ohio to his brother Hiram in Colesville, New York, dated 2nd of December, 1830. Following Hiram's flight from Manchester in October 1830 to evade creditors, his mother reported her bewilderment over his departure, since the secret combinations of his enemies were not fully developed. A short while later, a group of men claiming to represent Dr. Alexander McIntyre ransacked the Smiths' cabin, looking for Hiram. When Joseph Smith learned of the incident, he wrote to warn Hiram to beware of the Freemasons. McIntyre heard that you were in Manchester, and he got a warrant and went to your father's to distress the family. But Harrison, referring to brother Samuel Harrison Smith, overheard their talk, and they said that they cared not for the debt if they could obtain your body. They were there with carriages. Therefore, beware of the Freemasons. Masonic records indicate that the Smith family physician, Alexander McIntyre, and Levi Daggett, who sued Hiram and issued a warrant for his arrest, were both members of Palmyra's Masonic Lodge. In his letter to Hiram, Joseph not only revealed an anti-Masonic bias, but expressed his belief that Masons were among the chief persecutors of the Mormons in New York. So Peterson's attempt to limit secret combinations to persecutions is both inaccurate and incomplete. In context, Joseph Smith's revelations link secret combinations with war breaking out in America, which is what Jackson's opponents feared as well, especially the anti-Masons. Peterson notes that the vast majority of the anti-Masons joined the rising Whig Party, but at least in Kirtland, the Mormons were Jacksonians almost to a man. In an environment where political deals and compromise were the norm, voting is not the best index of ideological stance. Rather than voting conscience, Mormons tended to vote as a bloc to maximize their political clout. In Ohio, Mormons unhappily found themselves in counties where the anti-Masons were also anti-Mormons. To repeat what I wrote in 1989, in the political environment of Ohio, where Mormons found themselves in counties dominated by national Republicans, later Whigs, the Mormons quickly learned that the best way to break the economic and political hegemony of the Whigs and establish themselves in the area was to support Jackson and his party. They voted for him even though his party stood for liberalism, separation of church and state, and harbored infidels and Masons because their political choices were limited, not because their ideologies were in alignment with the Jacksonians. Translation of the Book of Mormon did not occur in Palmyra, but rather, for the most part, in Harmony, Pennsylvania, Peterson argues. In other words, for almost every dated Palmyra article commonly adduced, Joseph was 2 or 3 or perhaps even 4 days distant in an age that lacked telephone, radio, and television. But the fact remains that frantically anti-Masonic quotations from Palmyra newspapers have no clearly demonstrated direct relevance to the mind of Joseph Smith. On the contrary, Masonry was extensively discussed before Smith's departure from the Palmyra area in December 1827. New York had just completed its state and county elections, which in Smith's region was dominated by Masonic issues. Peterson wonders, without checking, if anti-Masonry was all the rage in Harmony as well. So far as I am aware, nobody has attempted to adduce proof. Because Harmony was essentially a rural community, and unlike Palmyra, had no newspaper, it is difficult to recover the specifics of its political and religious culture. The only newspaper in the county, the Susquehanna Register in Montrose, was considered a Masonic press for its support of Jackson. Nevertheless, it published an account of Morgan's abduction and murder from the New York Spectator in September 1827, a report of the Anti-Masonic Convention in Leroy, New York in March 1828, extracts from the oaths of the Royal Arch Degree and Order of the Cross in March 1828, mention of an anti-Masonic meeting in nearby Gibson in October 1828, the resolutions of another anti-Masonic meeting in December 1828, a notice dated 6th of April 1829 and published several times announcing that the anti-Masonic meeting was being rescheduled, and a report that the Anti-Masonic State Convention was held on the 25th of June in Harrisburg, reported in July 1829. A letter published in the Register dated 27th of October 1828 from Montrose and signed a young politician defended Jackson against insinuations that the whole Masonic fraternity in the Union are acting in concert to elevate General Jackson to the presidency on his Masonic merits. The writer points out that some Masons favor Adams' re-election, but complains that some Adams supporters in the eastern part of the county are so much heated with enthusiasm that they insinuate to the people that Jacksonianism and Freemasonry are synonymous. Anti-Masons meeting in Gibson, Susquehanna County, on the 18th of November 1828 declared, among other things, that of all secret societies, the Masonic institution, from its numbers, wealth, and corruption of its members, is the most dangerous to civil liberty now in existence. That we consider the institution of Freemasonry as immoral in its tendency, anti-republican in its principles, and dangerous in the extreme. That we concur in the sentiments so commonly expressed by our fellow citizens in the state of New York and elsewhere, that speculative Freemasonry is dangerous to man, wicked in its ceremonies, detrimental to religion, and dangerous to the administration of justice. Only the most naive researcher believes that passages from Palmyra newspapers, or even the Susquehanna Register for that matter, represent the mind of Joseph Smith. even if it could be demonstrated that Joseph Smith was in the vicinity of Palmyra or Harmony when a specific anti-Masonic editorial was published, it still would not reveal his state of mind, since it could never be demonstrated that he read it. Most researchers have cited local newspapers only to demonstrate that the subject was being discussed in a certain manner. At best, literature, like any artifact, can facilitate only a fragmentary reconstruction of the past. Moreover, newspapers were not the only sources of information, and an author's inspiration is largely untraceable. So, historical and literary criticism can only make indirect connections between a written work and its cultural environment. Fortunately, most researchers appreciate the limitations of their work and proceed cautiously. Some apologists have been too quick to declare victory. Referring to Daniel Peterson's apologetic, the late William J. Hamlin, for example, stated that the supposed Gadianton Masonry connection has been debunked, and John Gee asserted that the anti-Masonic thesis has been conclusively demonstrated to be a mirage. In this video, I have examined not only Peterson's arguments, but also those of Bushman, Osler, Quinn, and others, and have shown that they have been unsuccessful in overturning the interpretation of the Book of Mormon's first readers, which included Book of Mormon witness Martin Harris. The question is no longer whether Joseph Smith used Masonic and anti-Masonic elements from his environment to create something both similar and unique in the Book of Mormon, but rather to what extent. Nothing the apologists have suggested thus far has rendered unlikely the conclusion that Joseph Smith adopted an anti-Masonic posture in the Book of Mormon. I'm Dan Vogel. Thanks for watching.
Okay, hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Yeah, you can hear me. Okay, interesting. I'm glad that we're seeing this perspective. I'm glad that it's interesting that there's I thought Mormonism was the most straightforward thing, where it was like Mormonism is definitely Freemasonry and definitely Kabbalah. From what I'm reading, it seems to obviously be a lot more Kabbalah, but its connection with Freemasonry seems to be different. Yeah, its connection with Freemasonry is a little bit different. So we're learning more about that, and we'll keep going tomorrow with more documentaries, and we'll be reading more from that book, Masonry and Mormonism, or Mormonism and Freemasonry. All right, bye, guys.